Chapter 244. That is not possible. Qin Feng decisively rejected it. He did not have any intentions of looking down on the Mohist army, but he could not deny that the Black Cloud cavalry was stronger than the Mohist army. In a 50 versus 50 situation, the Mohist army could not win against the Black Cloud cavalry. Let's wait and see. Yi Li had removed most of the traps on the lake and under the cliff. She was amazed by the design of the traps. She did not dare to underestimate the wisdom of the ancient people. Originally, she had been considering if she should make some unconventional things to defend this mountain valley. Now, it seemed that she did not need to waste the effort. If all the traps in the valley were activated, and she did not know about it beforehand, even she did not have the confidence that she could escape unscathed. The simple buildings in the valley that had been equipped with arrows had been removed and replaced with a neat circle of wooden houses. In order to prevent sneak attacks from the snakes, rats, ants, and wild beasts in the forest, they had specially built walls around the perimeter and planted plants that repelled snakes and insects. All of this had taken almost 10 months of time and had just been completed a month ago. At the same time, she had spent all the silver that Han Mingyu had given her and her dowry. However, she had earned quite a bit from the trip to the Wind and Moon Pavilion. So when Yi Li saw everything in front of her, she felt satisfied and did not feel any heartache. 2 hours later, a black-clothed figure jumped down from the cliff and landed disheveled on the ground. Qin Feng looked. It was someone from the Shadow Guard. He snorted disdainfully inside. If Wang Fei had not removed the traps, that guy would have been shot through already. But he also understood that if Wang Fei had not warned him, he would not be much better off than that guy. This subordinate, and 17, greets Gongzi. Yi Li nodded and indicated for him to rest on the side. A short while later, another figure appeared. It was still someone from the Shadow Guard. Then it was the Black Cloud cavalry, and then it was the Mohist army. Qin Feng quickly found that it was different. The Shadow Guard and the Mohist army mostly moved alone and arrived alone. However, the soldiers of the Mo family army were traveling in groups. Therefore, every time they arrived, they would arrive in groups of 4 to 5. Although they weren't as agile as the Shadow Guard and the Mohist army, they were the ones with the most manpower. 4 hours later, Yi Li clapped her hands and gestured for everyone to get up. Greetings, young master. Yi Li nodded and glanced at the people in front of her. There were only 63 of them. There were 28 members of the Mohist army, 20 members of the Black Cloud cavalry, and 15 members of the Shadow Guard. Break up the formation. I want to see that the people standing on your left and right are people that you don't know and are not from the same team. Although these people didn't understand Yi Li's intentions, they still obeyed her orders and quickly returned to their positions. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. She had finally found some feeling. She pointed to the wooden house behind her and said, "From today onwards, you will live here for the next 3 months. Those who pass the final test can stay. The rest can return to their original places. If you're free, come and get to know the instructor who will be guiding you." Yi Li clapped her hands lightly. 8 men of different heights, young and old, walked in front of Yi Li and said in unison, "Young master." Qin Feng, who was standing beside Yi Li, couldn't help but raise the corner of his eyes. Although he couldn't tell where these people came from, without exception, they all exuded the aura of a powerhouse from the inside out. Without exception, they were all experts among experts. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, "Everyone, other than the training that I have arranged for you every day, these people will also be providing you with special guidance. Of course, if any of you can be placed in any of them, then this test can be skipped. How about it? Do you want to give it a try?" These words definitely carried a hint of provocation. Soldiers, no matter which era they were from, were definitely the most hot-blooded type of people. Almost immediately, one of them flew towards one of the 8 who seemed to be the strongest, while the others also chose their own targets. With a series of catcher sounds, the people who pounced on them all fell to the ground and couldn't get up. The youngest person clapped his hands and said to Yi Li with disdain, "Young master, aren't the people you chose too weak?" Yi Li smiled indifferently and said, "They aren't martial arts experts to begin with. I also don't need a group of top experts. The young man raised his eyebrows in confusion. If you don't need martial arts experts, then what do you want us to do? Yi Li asked with a smile. Can you teach martial arts experts in 3 months? The young man was speechless. No matter how conceited he was, he knew that learning martial arts wasn't something that could be accomplished in a day. Even he, who had been praised as a martial arts genius since he was young, had to study hard for more than 10 years to reach this level. Although I don't understand why the prince wants us to do, since the prince told us to listen to young master, then we will follow young master's orders. The older person said. Yi Li nodded with a smile and said, I didn't expect the prince to have so many hidden dragons and crouching tigers under him. He even has experts like you. But don't worry, it won't take up too much of your time. I only need you to give them some pointers in these 2 months. How about it? Is there anyone else who wants to try? The people in front had been defeated so miserably, so the people behind naturally retreated. Yi Li was very satisfied and said with a smile, then, let's go for a run first. Do you see the field outside the courtyard? For your safety, I even had people plant snake-repellent grass. It's broad daylight, and there won't be any wild beasts with so many of you. Go around the courtyard and exercise. So you're saying that there will be wild beasts at night? Everyone looked at each other. Qin Feng looked at the people below and had to ask himself. Wang. Young master, how much should we run? Yi Li smiled sweetly, run until we're lying on the ground. Thus, a group of confused elites was pulled out for a run, although they didn't understand the meaning of this. But from a certain point of view, they were all soldiers, so they still understood how to follow orders. So, with 8 experts holding the line, dozens of people lined up to run in circles. Only Qin Feng was left behind, still confused as he looked at Yi Li, who was clearly in a good mood. Yi Li smiled and waved at him, saying, take a look. Get used to it for the next 7 days. I'll make adjustments later. Qin Feng looked down at the file in his hand. He could recognize the beautiful handwriting, but when he put it together, he didn't understand what it meant at all. Every morning and evening, there was archery, fighting, running, and so on. Even if he didn't understand, he could understand what it meant. But what were these parallel bars, push-ups, and so on? What did they mean and what did they do? In Qin Feng's view, apart from archery and fighting, the things written on this paper were basically useless. Yi Li said with a smile, it doesn't matter if you don't understand. It also doesn't matter if you don't know. When Dark 2 and Dark 3 are free, I'll have them teach you. I originally planned on having Dark 2 lead these people, but when I think about it, you are the Black Cloud Cavalry's commander, so you definitely have more experience than Dark 2. That's why, when you have time, remember to make up for it. Seeing the innocent and sincere smile of the handsome youth in front of him, Qin Feng didn't know why, but he shivered. His intuition told him that the next few months wouldn't be easy. The two of them jumped onto the roof, perfectly able to see the scene outside the courtyard. Yi Li clapped her hands and sat down on the roof. She looked at the people running outside who were out of breath and shook her head. These are the elites of your Black Cloud Cavalry? Don't tell me you've ridden too many horses that you can't even outrun the Shadow Guard. Chapter 245. Qin Feng gritted his teeth. Of the 20 Shadow Guards, at least 15 of them knew martial arts, all right? Whoever dares to use Qinggong, I'll make you fly to the top of the cliff and jump back down 20 times, Yi Li said with a smile as she stared at the Shadow Guards who were trying to trick them. The Shadow Guards who were secretly enjoying the sorry state of their companions couldn't help but feel their legs go soft and they almost fell to the ground. Regardless of whether he understood it or not, when Qin Feng left with Yi Li in the evening, he couldn't help but look back with pity at the Ding Kingdom's elites who were lying outside the wall and unable to get up. Hearing the howls of wolves and the roars of unknown beasts coming from the distant forest, Qin Feng couldn't help but think that for Wang Fei to find such a place so close to the capital, was it because the heavens didn't like them? Wang Fei, should this subordinate stay behind to look after them? Those experts were indeed experts, but none of them looked like they could control those arrogant elite soldiers. It would be troublesome if there was a conflict at that time. Yi Li smiled and said, "Don't worry, they won't be able to run out. Those who run out without permission will be treated as deserters. Am I worried that they will run away? I don't have time to look after them every day. It's fine to let them fight on their own in the beginning. It's fine as long as they don't kill anyone. 7 days later, I will let Shadow 2 and Shadow 3 take turns to teach them. Qin Feng was silent for a moment before asking, this subordinate doesn't understand what Wang Fei wants to use them for. They can do a lot of things. Assassinations, intelligence gathering, guards, search, infiltration, ambush, rescue, and interrogation. No matter if it is land warfare, water warfare, field warfare, or street warfare, there is nothing that you can't think of that they can't learn. Qin Feng felt that his brain was a bit muddled. Even the soldiers of the Black Cloud Cavalry didn't know that much. Assassinations and intelligence gathering, aren't those the shadow guards? Why do they need to train other people? Is Wang Fei not satisfied with the shadow guards? Yi Li turned to look at his conflicted face and smiled. It is good for everyone to do their own job, but I prefer to have a troop that can do anything. Qin Feng thought for a moment before replying, if we can really do what Wang Fei says, then our battle strength can change completely. Yi Li shook her head and said, the so-called elites are the minority. Just like the Black Cloud Cavalry, the skills that they learn are not something that most soldiers can grasp. Also, we don't need so much, it's just a waste of resources. You should remember that the people I asked you to choose are all literate. This is not something that most soldiers can achieve. Qin Feng nodded. In the army, even among elites like the Black Cloud Cavalry, only half of the people were literate. Qin Feng more or less understood what Yi Li meant. The princess consort wanted to cultivate a group of people who were proficient in both the pen and the sword. But what was the use of cultivating so many talents? That's right, Qin Feng. When they were about to reach the city gates, Yi Li stopped the horse and examined Qin Feng. You were originally the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry, so you should know one rule, right? What? Keep it a secret. What you see today and what you experience in the next 3 months, without my permission, you are not allowed to reveal it to anyone. Qin Feng couldn't help but swallow, including the prince. Including the prince. This subordinate obeys. When they returned to the Wang Fu, night had already fallen. Qin Feng had received a bit of a shock today and went to find an and an San for advice as soon as he returned. When Yi Li returned to her room, Mo Xiaoyao was reading a book under the light. Hearing the sound of footsteps, he raised his head to look at her. You left the city? Yi Li nodded and turned to wash up. When she came out, the originally empty table was already filled with steaming hot food. Qing Xia and Qing Shuang looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was looking at them, and said with a smile, are you very free today? You're actually not busy in the study. Didn't the emperor summon you into the palace this morning? The two of them were extremely busy after returning from the southern border. The emperor in the palace seemed to have a stroke. Even though Mo Xiaoyao hadn't officially gone to court yet, he summoned Mo Xiaoyao into the palace every day to discuss matters. There wasn't anything to begin with, it's just that our emperor likes to discuss matters with his subjects recently. Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. He reached out to pull Yi Li to the table and indicated for her to eat first. Seeing that the table was filled with her favorite dishes, Yi Li smiled gratefully at him. Even though she wasn't really hungry, but having someone prepare food for her the moment she returned home was a good feeling. The emperor is prepared to hand over all matters regarding the marriage with the northern tribes to me. When Yi Li was almost done eating, Mo Xiaoyao said, hand it over to you. Yi Li frowned. After drinking the last mouthful of soup, she had the servants put the food away. She looked at him in confusion and asked, what do you mean by hand it over to you? Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, it means that I will be in charge of everything, including receiving the northern tribes' envoys, confirming the marriage partner, preparing the dowry and sending the bride. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Yi Li couldn't help but frown. You need to confirm the marriage partner to receive the northern tribes' envoys? Mo Xiaoyao looked at her with a smile. In reality, you need to be in charge of confirming the marriage partner. So these days, you will probably be very busy and won't be able to go out of the city. Yi Li weakly waved her hand. She didn't even need to imagine what would happen when the news spread out. Which noble in the capital would be willing to marry their daughter to the northern tribes, a barren place? She was afraid that tomorrow, the people who came to plead for her would break the threshold of the Prince Ding mansion. The worst thing was that she couldn't choose no one, but no matter who she chose, she would definitely offend people. So, the emperor wanted to make more enemies for the Prince Ding mansion? There are people watching over there, so I don't have to run out of the city every day. But what do you think about the marriage partner? Mo Xiaoyao thought for a while and said, the emperor's thoughts are hinting that the eldest daughter of the Hua family is the most suitable. The Empress Dowager prefers Princess Rong Hua, but the Empress Dowager can't say anything now. In addition, the third daughter of the Liu family and Princess Shuncheng are also candidates. But they are not very eye-catching. I'm afraid the northern tribes won't agree. Yi Li frowned and said, so, it is very likely that the final choice will be between Tian Xiong and Princess Rong Hua? Since the emperor likes Tian Xiong, why didn't he make the decree himself? Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, he is now having a headache. So, he naturally wants us to offend people. I know that you and Miss Hua are good friends, so it's not a big deal to remove her. Later, you can just pick one of the princesses of the royal family. As long as people have selfish motives, Yi Li and Hua Tian Xiong have a good relationship. So, naturally, she didn't want Hua Tian Xiong to be chosen for the marriage. Yi Li couldn't help but feel annoyed when she was assigned the task of choosing a candidate for the marriage alliance. No matter who she chose to handle this matter, she would feel guilty. She would rather risk her life on the battlefield than handle this matter cleanly. Seeing Yi Li frown, Mo Xiaoyao just shook his head slightly and said indifferently, being in the royal family, they are supported by the people. Whether it is the marriage or dying on the battlefield, it is their fate. Li doesn't have to feel sorry. Chapter 246. Yi Li shook her head and said helplessly, these princesses are all spoiled and pampered. Who knows how much they would suffer if they were to marry into the northern tribes. If the two countries really wanted to marry each other, then it would be fine. But this. It was obvious that it was just for show. Both countries knew that the princess was just a useless sacrifice. If the two countries did not marry each other, they would not fight for a while. If they did marry each other, it was impossible for them to not fight. It was just that they were not prepared for it yet. Yi Li was not someone who could not make decisions, but she hated this kind of meaningless sacrifice. Knowing that she was not in a good mood, Mo Xiaoyao did not continue this topic. He smiled and said, what did you do outside the city today? You borrowed 8 experts from me and transferred people from the Mohist army's Black Cloud Cavalry and Shadow Guard. What do you want to do? Is Miss Li really not going to tell me? Yi Li looked up and smiled, I am still in the experimental stage. I want to see what I can do in these few months. I will tell you when I have the results. If it doesn't work, I will return them to you. Mo Xiaoyao thought for a while and said, what does Miss Li want to train a group of people for? The shadow guards around you are all pretty well trained. Yesterday, the shadow guard commander even asked me if he could ask you to train his subordinates. I heard that in Yonglin, the two by your side took care of my shadow guard. It was just a sneak attack. Yi Li smiled. It is not easy to sneak attack. As a shadow guard, they were used to being in the dark and being on guard at all times. If these people could be sneak attacked by 2 people, it proved that they were stronger. Yi Li smiled, when this group of people comes out, I can send a few to be your guards. Mo Xiaoyao nodded, I will wait and see. If Miss Li can really train a group of experts, these people can be your guards. That's too wasteful. Yi Li shook her head and smiled. You'll know what they can do when the time comes. Just don't try to steal them from me. I hope they can exist openly in the army. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows in surprise. I thought Li wanted them to become a secret force. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, of course, we still need to keep it a secret. However, what we need to hide is their numbers, where they are stationed, their true strength, and their detailed identities. We don't need to hide their achievements or their existence. If it was really as I imagined, their existence would be known sooner or later, and it would be impossible for them to hide. I hope that they will be rewarded like normal soldiers, and those who are capable will be promoted. The Black Cloud Cavalry was still a proper army, but the Shadow Guard was a bit of a scam. Except for a few who could stand out from the crowd, almost all the Shadow Guards could only be Shadow Guards for the rest of their lives. They didn't have an honorable identity, no promotion, no glory, no friends, and they couldn't even get married and have children. Most of them were too old to be Shadow Guards. Although they were supported by the king's palace, they weren't young anymore. Most of their lives were ruined. Like this, there weren't any traitors in the Ding King's palace's Shadow Guard. It could only be said that the ancient people placed great importance on loyalty and righteousness. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and thought for a moment before saying, Li didn't treat the people by your side as Shadow Guards from the start. And Yi went to the army, and with his strength that could be considered outstanding among the Shadow Guard, it was only a matter of time before he stood out. And Sai went to Xiling to handle some matters. As for the and San by your side, you should also teach them some of the things on the surface to handle. Yi Li smiled and said, whether it is their ability or intelligence, they are much stronger than most people. However, most of their lives can only be hidden in the dark. I feel that it is too much of a waste of talent. Moreover, the human heart is something that is very difficult to understand. Perhaps one day they won't want to hide in the dark anymore. If that day really comes, the consequences will be even more serious than not having a Shadow Guard. Therefore, if they have the ability and are willing to be used by me, I naturally can't treat them unfairly. Of course, if someone wants to betray me, I won't be merciful. Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment and said, Li's words are reasonable, but Li might not know that there are actually many large families that have their own hidden powers. Especially those like the personal Shadow Guard, they know too many secrets of their masters, so the control is very strict. In some families, the Shadow Guard who knows too much will be silenced in the end. Yi Li said, then it's also impossible to give the Shadow Guard the same military position or other ranks, and the same clear rewards and punishments. After a certain number of years, they will be transferred to the Black Cloud Cavalry or the Mohist Army. Mo Xiaoyao was a bit curious and said with a smile, what does Li Li have in mind? Yi Li said, if I am satisfied with the results of this training, these people should be able to serve before the age of 35. After 35, they will not be allowed to leave and will be transferred to the Mohist army with the same rank. Of course, if they have other abilities and interests, they can also consider civil service or other positions. This is just a thought. In any case, the people haven't even been trained yet, so there is still time to consider this problem. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, I understand, Li Li wants to pave the way for their future, right? Yi Li nodded and looked at Mo Xiaoyao with a serious expression. I once heard a saying. The soldiers have already shed blood for the country, so they shouldn't be allowed to shed any more tears. There are also those retired veterans and injured soldiers, their days aren't easy. However, I can't care so much right now, so I have to at least settle down the people under me. Because she used to be a soldier, but the treatment in her previous life was naturally much better than the people in this life. In ancient times, being a soldier wasn't a glorious profession. Good men didn't become soldiers, and good iron didn't make nails. Many people joined the army because they had no other choice. Although I don't know why Li Li would have such thoughts, I will think about it carefully. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the woman who was deep in thought and said softly, early in the morning, Yi Li received the Empress summons from the palace. In fact, she was already impressed by Mo Jingqi's patience that the emperor didn't summon her to the palace as soon as they returned to the capital. With Yi Li's current status, in the entire capital, other than the emperor, the empress, and the empress dowager, no one could casually request to see her. However, the empress dowager could be said to be under house arrest by Mo Jingqi. Last time, something happened when Yi Li entered the palace. Prince Ding could completely refuse the emperor's summons to Princess Ding, so he summoned her in the name of the empress. The empress summoned Yi Li in the name of admiring flowers. It was said that the begonia flowers in the imperial garden bloomed beautifully, so the empress ordered all the noble madams in the capital to welcome Princess Ding and admire the flowers at the same time. Seeing the flowers in the imperial garden, Yi Li vaguely remembered that this year's 100-flower festival had already ended. She couldn't help but smile. She was busy all day outside, So how could she still remember the festival that the noble ladies in the capital were longing for? Yi Li wanted to enter the palace, and Mo Xiaoyao didn't care whether he had received the empress invitation and directly followed her. It was obvious that he didn't trust the royal family. Mo Jingqi was so angry that his face turned black, but he couldn't say anything. After all, the matter of the Empress Dowager's disappearance had yet to be investigated. Chapter 247. Prince Ding, Wang Fei definitely won't be lost here at Ai's place. Could it be that you still don't believe in Ai? Empress Hua looked at the two people walking together and couldn't help but smile. Looking at Yi Li's eyes, there was a bit of sighing and envy, so she teased the two with a smile. Mo Xiaoyao and Hua family's relationship was originally close. Obviously, Mo Xiaoyao didn't have any ill feelings towards the empress. He faintly smiled and said, Li Li has never liked crowds. There are also no elders in our Fu to teach her. It's inevitable that she doesn't know many things. I just happened to be idle today, so I accompanied her. Please don't blame the empress. Being so intimate in public made Yi Li look at Mo Xiaoyao a bit uncomfortably. Mo Xiaoyao's expression was as usual, still as gentle as jade. Seeing this, the noble women and young ladies present couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. For a moment, it wasn't known how many envious and jealous gazes were cast on Yi Li. Yi Li could clearly see Hua Tianxiong, who was standing beside the empress, gloating at her misfortune. She couldn't help but secretly glare at her. Even I feel honored that Prince Ding has followed your majesty here. However, those who came today are all women. If Prince Ding stays here, I'm afraid they will feel embarrassed. The empress looked at the two with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, therefore, Prince Ding should go somewhere else. Don't disturb Ai's banquet. Sitting on the side, Zhaoyang Princess also smiled and said, Empress is right. When Ding King Fu's second Gongzi appeared, more than half of the capital's young ladies lost their souls. Xiao Yarrow shouldn't stay here and attract attention. With the Empress and I here, are you still afraid that your Wang Fei will be harmed? Zhaoyang Princess, who had always been a bit cold, was clearly in a good mood and actually started joking. The words that came out of her mouth made the young ladies present blush. They all lowered their heads, not daring to look at the outstanding figure standing in front of the Empress. Seeing the different expressions on everyone's faces, Yi Li couldn't help but laugh in her heart. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said softly, if Prince has something to do, you can go do it. I'm not in the way. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said softly, I'll go see His Majesty first. I'll wait for you to return to the Fu together. Yi Li nodded. Only then did Mo Xiaoyao bid farewell to the Empress and eldest princess, turning to leave. Hua Tianxiang, who was standing beside the Empress, winked at Yi Li with a flirtatious look on her face. Being so lovey-dovey in public really made people hate them. After sending off the eye-catching Mo Xiaoyao, Yi Li sat down in the first empty seat next to the Empress. Opposite her, eldest Princess Zhaoyang smiled kindly at her, but Princess Zhaoren and Princess Ronghua were not so kind. In this regard, Yi Li was a little helpless. She didn't have any likes or dislikes for Princess Ronghua, but this princess seemed to look down on her, Princess Ding. In the past, when Yi Ying was here, most of the time, Princess Ronghua's firepower was concentrated on Yi Ying, but now that Yi Ying was gone, Princess Ronghua's attention was obviously back to her. Looking at the look of disdain in her eyes, Yi Li laughed in her heart. Does this Princess Ronghua know that a large part of her future may be in her hands? Imperial concubine Yun has arrived. Wang Xiaorong has arrived. Just as the Empress was about to speak, a sharp voice came from outside. The Empress couldn't help but frown. Obviously, she didn't like the people who came. Not long after, two well-dressed women leisurely walked over. The woman in the lead had a charming appearance and an exquisite figure. There was a hint of seductiveness between her brows. Although the woman beside her only had a delicate and pretty appearance, her pair of slender phoenix eyes outlined a hint of enchanting intent. The two stepped forward and bowed. These concubines greet the Empress. These two were the Emperor's favorite concubines. Imperial concubine Yun was one of the 4 concubines. Everyone present, except for Yi Li and the 2 princesses, had to stand up and greet her. The empress glanced at the two and faintly said, "You may rise." Why did imperial concubine Yun and Wang Xiaorong come? Imperial concubine Yun smiled and said, "This concubine has disturbed the empress' mood. It's just that. This concubine and younger sister Wang heard that Princess Ding is also here today. This concubine has admired Princess Ding's reputation for a long time. Finally getting this opportunity, we asked the emperor to come and greet Princess Ding." Imperial concubine Yun's words were said innocently, but she also pointed out to everyone that she came because of the emperor's decree. Moreover, she specially came to see Princess Ding. Originally, when the empress summoned a woman with a title, without an invitation, even concubines could not come before the age of 18. Her words not only washed away the accusation of looking down on the empress, but also pointed out the emperor's love for her. "I don't dare to greet you." Yi Li greets imperial concubine Yun. Yi Li faintly smiled, but had no intention of standing up to greet her. The Yun family and the Wang family were Mo Jingqi's loyalists. The empress was not trusted by Mo Jingqi. Noble consort Liu had a cold personality. Mo Jingqi wanted to test Yi Li, so he naturally sent imperial concubine Yun. Imperial concubine Yun was slightly startled. She turned her head to look at Yi Li, who was sitting to the side. Most women always had some hostility towards women who were more outstanding than them. Before, imperial concubine Yun was not very favored. Naturally, she had not seen Princess Ding. However, these days, she had heard many things about Princess Ding. The Yun family was originally loyal to the emperor. Now that the emperor had given up on the Yi family and supported the Yun family, he also doted on imperial concubine Yun very much. Although imperial concubine Yun did not overestimate herself and want to provoke the empress and noble consort Liu, she did not care about ordinary people. Therefore, Yi Li, who seemed to be very afraid of the emperor, naturally paid more attention to her. Originally, imperial concubine Yun thought she would see a graceful and noble woman like the empress or a beauty like noble consort Liu. However, when imperial concubine Yun turned her head, she saw a woman sitting to the right of the empress wearing a light green dress with silver peony patterns. Her black hair was casually tied up, and there were 2 pearl-tasseled hairpins in her hair. Compared to the beautiful clothes and exquisite makeup of the noble women present, she was more graceful and casual. It seemed that it was very difficult for people to connect her with the rumored woman who led 2,000 Black Cloud cavalry to guard the border city. It was even harder to imagine that Prince Ding seemed to dote on this princess very much. Imperial concubine Yun had also seen Su Zuidi. The Princess Ding in front of her was beautiful, but compared to the peerless Su Zuidi, she seemed to be lacking a bit. "This is Princess Ding. Your Highness the Empress, can this concubine sit with Princess Ding? This concubine has admired Princess Ding's elegance for a long time. I really want to have a good chat with Princess." Suppressing the confusion in her heart, imperial concubine Yun smiled brightly, making people unable to refuse. The empress glanced at her and faintly said, "Since it's like this, you and Wang Xiaorong can sit with Princess Ding." Imperial concubine Yun's eyes flashed, but she still happily agreed. Pulling Wang Xiaorong, she sat down next to Yi Li. Although she was unwilling to sit next to Yi Li, she also knew that Princess Ding would not give her a seat. Or it could be said that even if Princess Ding really got up to give her a seat, she might not really dare to sit down. The gathering between the noble ladies was more or less the same. It was just that there were many people with other things on their minds today. When most of the people had arrived, the Empress personally got up and led everyone to the Imperial Garden to admire the flowers. Sure enough, the Imperial Garden was filled with flowers. Although it was already the beginning of summer, the scenery did not lose to spring. The noble ladies sat in groups of 2s and 3s to chat and admire the flowers. Yi Li and the others with high statuses naturally followed the Empress. After walking around the garden, the Empress led everyone to a pavilion in the middle of the Imperial Garden to sit down. Only then did the Empress ask with a smile, "Princess Ding rarely comes to the palace. What do you think of the scenery in the palace?" Yi Li smiled and said, "It's naturally rich and graceful, just like a paradise." The Empress glanced at her and said, "You're also speaking pleasantries with I. Rich and graceful is true, but just like a paradise, What kind of paradise would be like this? Her tone was filled with irritation and indifference. Shaking her head, she said with a smile, "If it were up to me, it would be best to let nature take its course. The scenery in the palace is extremely beautiful, but with all these things gathered together, it is a bit dazzling. I have been to the Prince Ding mansion before. I think it must be to Princess's liking." Chapter 248. The Ding Prince's mansion was very large, but the decorations were very comfortable and elegant. Yi Li was very fond of it. Zhaoyang Princess nodded her head in agreement, saying with a smile, "What the Empress says is correct. When I was young, I often liked to stay at the Prince Ding mansion. Every time, I was reluctant to return." Yi Li smiled faintly and replied, "Your Imperial Highness and Princess praise us too much. The Prince Ding mansion has been filled with military officers for generations. It is unavoidable that it is somewhat crude. The Prince and I do not like bustling places. We only seek peace and quiet." Sitting at Yi Li's side, Imperial concubine Yun curiously asked. This concubine heard the Emperor say that Princess Ding once guarded Yonglin in Yongju and assisted the defending generals in resisting the Prince of Li's rebel army. Can Princess Consort tell us what happened at that time? So it turns out that Princess Consort also knows martial arts. No wonder last year, you were able to frighten the shilling princess into a daze with a single arrow. Yi Li smiled faintly and replied, "Imperial concubine Yun is joking. It was only because the prince was worried about my safety that he learned some superficial martial arts. The ones guarding Yonglin were the soldiers at the border, not Yi Li." Wang Xiaorong smiled and replied, "Princess Consort is too modest." This concubine has also heard the Emperor speak of it. The Emperor also said that if it were not for Princess Consort's efforts, Shattering Snow Pass would have been lost long ago. Princess Consort has worked hard for the Da Chu state. It is a pity that this concubine has lived in the palace for so long and is unable to contribute to the Da Chu state like Princess Consort. It is truly a life's regret. Hey! Wang Xiaorong also wants to contribute to the Da Chu state? Why don't I ask Imperial Father to send you to the border to contribute to the Da Chu state? With Wang Xiaorong being so loyal to the Da Chu state, Imperial Father will definitely be very happy. Everyone turned their heads to see Princess Changle, who was wearing a pink dress. She blinked her bright eyes and giggled as she looked at Wang Xiaorong. Forcing a smile, Wang Xiaorong replied, "Princess must be joking. Your concubine does not have the strength to truss a chicken." Even though she was favored and placed in an important position by her family, Wang Xiaorong still did not dare to provoke Princess Changle. Princess Changle was the Empress's only daughter, as well as the only legitimate child of the entire Da Chu state's imperial household. Although Mo Jingqi did not dote on the Empress, he still respected her. He doted on this innocent and cute princess even more. If Princess Changle were to run to the imperial study and spread rumors, then he would be in deep trouble. Princess Changle rolled her eyes. Disdainfully looking at her, she stated, "Then why are you still speaking so much nonsense? This princess thought that you were too embarrassed to tell Imperial Father. It just so happens that Uncle Prince Ding is also in the Imperial study. This princess will help you ask Imperial Father. Perhaps Imperial Father will agree on account of your loyalty. Changle, cease your nonsense." Seeing Princess Changle's indecent actions, the Empress frowned in displeasure. Making a funny face, Princess Changle stepped into the pavilion and properly paid her respects. Daughter pays respects to Imperial Mother. Greetings to Princess Ding and the two grandaunts. Zhaoyang Princess extended her hand to pull Princess Changle over. Smiling, she said, "It's been a long time since we last met. Little princess, you've grown into a young lady." With a smile, Yi Li led the way. It had only been a year since they last met, but Princess Changle had indeed grown considerably compared to when she had first met her outside Yaohua Palace. At the very least, she no longer appeared to be hiding in the bushes. Princess Changle clearly still remembered Yi Li lying in Princess Zhaoyang's embrace. She winked at her. Startled, Yi Li responded with a shallow smile. Imperial concubine Yun looked at Princess Changle, who was acting spoiled in Princess Zhaoyang's embrace. Smiling, she said, "Princess, We were just about to hear about the princess consort's story of leading soldiers into battle at the border town. Does princess not wish to hear about it? Princess Changle's eyes turned. Smiling brightly, she said, "This princess is a virtuous and virtuous woman. Of course, I would not pry into other people's private affairs. Only those wicked women who spend all day scheming and scheming against others would expend great effort to pry into other people's private affairs. Isn't that right, Imperial Concubine Yun?" The gentle smile on Imperial Concubine Yun's face was somewhat stiff. Forcing a smile, she said, "Of course the princess is a virtuous and virtuous woman." Princess Changle lightly snorted. Turning her head to the Empress, she asked, "Imperial Concubine Mother, can this son invite Princess Ding an elder cousin to play?" Smiling faintly, the Empress replied, "That will depend on whether or not Princess Ding has the time to play with you. You're not young anymore. All day long, you're pestering people to play with you. What are you thinking?" Smiling, Princess Changle replied, "This girl is very fond of Princess Ding." The Empress turned her head to Yi Li and smiled. "This girl is not sensible. Princess, please don't laugh at her." Yi Li smiled and replied, "How can that be? The princess is pure and kind. To be liked by the princess is Yi Li's honor. May I know where the princess wishes to invite me to play?" Princess Changle joyfully left Zhaoyang Princess's embrace, pulling Yi Li with one hand and Hua Tianxiang with the other as she ran outside. "Follow this princess." Yi Li's nimble movements did not matter. On the contrary, Hua Tianxiang, being dragged along by Princess Changle, stumbled and fell. Behind them, the Empress helplessly instructed the servants to follow and keep an eye on them. Princess Changle pulled the two through the Imperial Gardens, running all the way to the back of the rockery in the northwest corner of the Imperial Gardens before stopping. Turning her head, she saw that the palace servants had not followed them. Only then did she relax and frown. Softly complaining, she said, "These people are truly annoying. Following me everywhere." Yi Li smiled and replied, "They are following the Empress and the Emperor's orders. If they can't find you, perhaps they will be punished." Waving her hand, Princess Changle replied, "Don't worry. My imperial mother is a good person. She will not casually punish palace servants. However, those people are very annoying. They like to tell imperial father and the other concubines what I say. This princess hates them. The two of you, follow me." With a face full of smiles, Princess Changle climbed up the rockery. As she did so, she turned her head and said to the two, "This place is very large. If we climb up, they won't be able to find us." Yi Li looked around. This rockery was indeed quite large. If they hid here and did not look carefully, they might not be able to find them. However, "Princess, why are we climbing up?" Princess Changle turned her head to look at her. Stroking her hair, which was adorned with a string of pearls, she replied, "Uncle Prince Ding said that a bad woman has made you unhappy and wanted me to find a place to hide you. In a moment, he will come to pick you up. Also, doesn't elder cousin have something to tell you?" Yi Li did not know whether to laugh or cry. Hide her. She dared to bet that this was not what Mo Xiaoyao had told Princess Changle. Tilting her head, she looked at the similarly astonished Hua Tianxiang. Hua Tianxiang was also looking at Princess Changle. Princess Changle lightly snorted, turning her head to continue climbing. "Who is this princess?" "Imperial father wishes to marry elder cousin Xiangxiang to the northern tribes." I asked Mama. "The northern tribes is a very bad place. The people there are coarse and barbaric. It is cold and secluded. There is also no good food to eat. I went to beg Uncle Prince Ding. Uncle Prince Ding said that Princess Ding has the final say in this matter. As a result, we can speak now. Come on up." Helpless, the two could only follow her and climb up. Sure enough, there was a place halfway up the rockery where people could hide. Seeing how quiet it was obvious that there were people here often. Sitting on the rockery, Yi Li smiled and asked, "Therefore, Princess wishes to request that I not marry Tianxiang to the northern tribes." Princess Changle gazed at her anxiously. "Will you agree?" Yi Li smiled. "What benefits would there be if I agree?" Thinking it over, Princess Changle replied, This princess can give you all of my treasures. I have many treasures. They were all given to me by Imperial Father. Imperial Mother said that these things are very precious. Is that possible? Chapter 249. Chang'e. Hua Tianxiang's eyes reddened. Of course, she did not want to be married off to the northern tribes. However, regardless of whether it was her father, mother, grandfather, or grandmother, they all knew that although the emperor had said that Princess Ding would be fully responsible for this matter, if he truly wanted her to be married off, even Leah would be powerless. She only wanted the Prince Ding mansion to bear the reputation of offending the Hua family. As a result, from the very beginning, neither her grandfather, grandmother, nor herself had any intention of speaking with Li Er, only making things difficult for her. Why does Princess not want Tianxiang to be married off? Princess Chang'e bit her lip as she gazed at the two. After a long time, she hesitantly replied, Imperial Mother said that only princesses can be married off. However, we currently do not have a suitable princess. As a result, we have to choose someone else for the marriage. Imperial Mother said that these are all matters of the Imperial clan. This princess is still young. Otherwise, this princess will personally go for the marriage. With cousin Xiangxiang gone, maternal grandmother, uncle, and aunt will be sad. Aunt will also cry in front of Imperial Mother. Princess Chang'e spoke intermittently, but both of them understood. Princess Chang'e believed that Tianxiang was going to suffer in her place in the marriage. As a result, she impatiently came to beg Yi Li. With great difficulty, Princess Chang'e finished speaking. Gazing hopefully at her, she asked, Princess Ding, can you not have cousin Xiangxiang go for the marriage? Yi Li smiled faintly. Nodding her head, she replied, I can. I promise you. Li Er. Hearing this, Hua Tianxiang stared blankly. Gently biting her red lips, she gazed at Yi Li. Her normally bright and beautiful eyes flickered with tears. She knew that Yi Li was in a difficult position. For the emperor to hand over such an important matter to the Prince Ding mansion, it appeared that he had great trust in the Prince Ding mansion. In reality, he had pushed the Prince Ding mansion to the heart of the struggle. Yi Li's easy acceptance of Princess Chang'e's request made Hua Tianxiang both happy and worried. Yi Li reached out to grasp Hua Tianxiang's hand, which was tightly tugging at her sleeve, and lightly patted it. Smiling, she stated, a person's heart is always somewhat biased. What's more, it's a matter of offending people anyway. Why can't I choose something that makes me feel better? Princess Chang'e did not understand what was so difficult about this matter. Cheerfully throwing herself into Yi Li's embrace, she smiled and said, You really are a good person. This princess likes you. Yi Li's elegant eyebrows rose. Smiling, she asked, If I do not agree, Princess will not like me. Princess Chang'e looked at Yi Li with an awkward expression. After struggling for a long time, she finally replied, Imperial Uncle Ding said that you would agree. But even if you really don't agree, this princess won't blame you. Imperial Mother said. Imperial Mother said that no matter who you send, it's not your fault. Because this has nothing to do with you. Not expecting the Empress to say such words, Yi Li stared blankly for a moment. Pinching Princess Chang'e's small face, she smiled and said, Thank the Empress for me. The Empress was right, so no matter who was sent to the marriage, it was not the princess's fault. Princess, you don't have to be too sad. Princess Chang'e blinked her eyes. Hesitantly, she nodded her head and said, If this princess grows up, this princess will personally go to the marriage. Yi Li's impression of princesses and princesses of the imperial household was not very good. She did not expect that this little princess would not only be cute, but also have such thoughts. Kneading her small, tender face, Yi Li smiled and said, The Empress and the Empress would not be willing to part with the princess's marriage. Moreover, does the princess know what a marriage is? Going to another country will not be as comfortable as staying in the Dhu state. Princess Chang'e bared her teeth at Yi Li grabbing the hand that was ravaging her face. She said in a muffled voice, I know. Imperial Mother has told me that, as a princess, although I can enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and rank, I cannot make my own decisions regarding marriage. Even Imperial Mother cannot. If, in the future, there is a need for a marriage and Imperial Father chooses Chang'e, Chang'e cannot cause trouble. This is because this is the responsibility of a princess. Hearing Princess Chang'e's words, Yi Li and Hua Tianxiang could only inwardly sigh. The palace was not a good place to talk. Even if the three of them hid in a secluded area, it was inevitable that groups of palace maids and eunuchs would search for them. Yi Li pulled Princess Chang'e to her feet. Since we have finished speaking, let's go out. Taking the initiative to go out was much better than being found by others. If the stately imperial consort of the emperor and the little princess were to be seen hiding in the rock garden, she would lose all face. Naturally, Princess Chang'e also heard the shouts coming from afar. Her faintly elegant brows knitted together. Imperial Mother will not always restrain me. These people are the most annoying. It's as if they are afraid that this princess will speak too much with them. Yi Li took the lead to descend from the rock garden. Turning her head, she carried Princess Chang'e down and then helped Hua Tianxiang descend. Walking out and seeing the palace maids rushing towards them, Hua Tianxiang helplessly smiled and said, "It is not convenient for me to come and find you right now. Originally, I thought that we could talk." It seems that the palace is truly not a peaceful place to talk. Yi Li smiled and replied, "What's so inconvenient about it? If you have the time, just come and find me." Thinking it over, Hua Tianxiang shook her head and said, "Forget it. I know that you don't have the time to play right now." Yi Li thought about how she had only been back for 2 or 3 days. She was truly too busy. Helplessly, she smiled and said, "It's been too long since I've been in the capital. I haven't even seen older sister Zheng'e yet." Hua Tianxiang curled her lips and said, "Sooner or later, you will be a family. Zheng'e has been detained by her mother in preparation for her marriage. Even if you want to see her, you won't necessarily be able to." Sweeping her gaze over the palace maids who had almost arrived, Yi Li laughed softly and said, "If you weren't so picky, everything would have been fine if the marriage had been set early." Hua Tianxiang stared blankly, her charming face immediately turning red. The palace maids who had been searching for Zheng'e had already arrived. She could only glare hatefully at Yi Li, unable to say anything. Returning to the pavilion, imperial concubine Yun and Wang Zhaorong were no longer there. The empress saw Hua Tianxiang's delicate face, which had yet to fade, and then looked at Princess Chang'e, who was winking at her. Understanding, she nodded towards Yi Li with some gratitude. Yi Li smiled faintly, pulling Princess Chang'e into the pavilion to sit down. Only Zhaoyang Princess, Zhaoren Princess, and Princess Ronghua remained in the pavilion. Although the other noble ladies wanted to plead for their daughters, they knew that the palace was not a place where one could do as they pleased. As such, they did not come forward to disturb them. As soon as Yi Li sat down, she sensed 2 unfriendly gazes directed at her from across the pavilion. As always, Princess Zhaoren was picky and contemptuous, while Princess Ronghua glared at Yi Li with even more resentment than her mother's. Yi Li picked up the teacup that a palace maid had just brought over. Just as she lifted the lid, Qingyu, who was behind her, suddenly spoke, Princess Consort has overworked herself recently and is weak and cold. Sir Shun has instructed that Princess Consort should avoid green tea." Yi Li's hand paused. Holding the teacup, she lightly inhaled. Regretfully, she sighed, "This is first-rate Longjing tea. It is a waste of Her Imperial Majesty's good tea." The Empress's eyes flashed, a trace of coldness flitting across her brow. Smiling at Yi Li, she said, "This Longjing tea is indeed good. However, the body is still more important. If you like it, I can have someone send some to the Prince Ding mansion." Yi Li was not polite. Smiling, she replied, "Then, many thanks to Her Imperial Majesty." "Imperial Majesty, please do not blame me for being greedy." Princess Chang'e sat in Yi Li's embrace. Blinking her clear eyes, she stood up and said, "Imperial Mother, Chang'e is going to practice calligraphy." Chapter 250. The Empress dotingly looked at her daughter and nodded. "Go." After Princess Chang'e disappeared, Princess Ronghua looked critically at Yi Li. With a light snort, she said, "Princess Ding, Aren't you proficient in both civil and martial arts? When did your body become so weak that you can't even drink a cup of tea? Yi Li smiled at Princess Ronghua and replied, Princess must be joking. However, if there is something wrong with the body, it is natural to have a physician examine it as soon as possible. Concealing one's illness for fear of treatment is not a good thing. What do you think, Princess? Princess Ronghua proudly raised her eyebrows. Picking up the teacup, she took a sip and said, This princess has never heard of someone who cannot drink tea because they are unwell. Enough, Ronghua. Seeing Princess Ronghua being so overbearing, Zhaoyang Princess frowned in displeasure. You are an unmarried girl. Can't you speak properly? What is it like to be so rampant? I am about to be married off to the northern tribes. Who cares if I speak properly? Princess Ronghua angrily said. Finished speaking, she glared at Yi Li. It was obvious that she had been holding back these words for a long time. Yi Li smiled bitterly in her heart. The marriage alliance was decided by the emperor. What did it have to do with her? Turning around and handing the teacup to Qingyu, Yi Li decided not to speak. To the side, Princess Zhaoren could not help but ask, Princess Ding, what are your plans for the marriage alliance candidates? Yi Li inwardly shook her head. Princess Zhaoren and Princess Ronghua both had the same temperament. Probably because they were born into the imperial family, they were used to being arrogant. Even at this time, their words carried a commanding tone. The emperor's desired candidates are all listed. Yesterday, the prince brought them back to the residence. I have not had the time to look at them. I am unable to answer princess's question. The emperor's desired candidate is Hua Tianxiang. Who doesn't know? Princess Ronghua blurted out. You are clearly trying to exclude her. Do you think that this princess does not know? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and smiled. She looked up at Princess Ronghua and asked doubtfully, The emperor likes Miss Hua? Since that's the case, why didn't His Majesty directly order young Miss Hua to go to the marriage alliance instead of letting this consort choose a suitable candidate? Since that's the case, since we're all in the palace today, why don't we ask Princess Ronghua to ask the emperor if he really likes Miss Hua? That way, this consort won't be able to pick someone who doesn't meet the emperor's expectations. Princess Ronghua, what do you think? Princess Ronghua was so angry that her face turned white. Although she didn't know much about politics, it didn't mean that she didn't know anything. Why didn't the emperor directly issue a decree for Hua Tianxiang to marry? There had once been a rumor that one of Prince Ding's fiancés had been scared to death by his disfigured face. Also, the present situation at court was delicate. Even if there were people who admired Prince Ding's presence, they would not come up to talk in the imperial garden. Yi Li was naturally in a good mood to be able to leave the imperial palace early. A faint fragrance wafted through the imperial garden. Yi Li leisurely walked beside Mo Xiaoyao, enjoying this tranquil time. She did not forget to show concern for Mo Xiaoyao's mood. What is it? What did the emperor say? You don't seem to be in a good mood. Mo Xiaoyao tilted his head to look at her and asked, What was in the tea just now? Yi Li looked in shock at him. How did he know what had happened in the pavilion so quickly? There should be something like musk and safflower. Qingyu has gone to investigate. There should be a result when we return. Seeing that his expression was not good, Yi Li still told him everything she knew. She was also curious about what had been put in her tea. Those things did have some effect on the body, but the effect on her was limited. She really did not understand why those people would take the risk to put those things in her tea. Even a laxative would be more effective than those other medicines. Mo Xiaoyao stopped walking. He tilted his head to look at Yi Li and asked, Yi Li, do you know what the effects of those medicines are? Clearing the meridians and promoting blood flow, stopping pain. Li, when we return to the Fu, you will study medicine with Mr. Chen for a month. After a moment of silence, Mo Xiaoyao finally opened his mouth to speak. Medicine? Yi Li's lips twitched. All right, it wasn't that she didn't know that these two medicines had another effect, but, at the same time, it was said that it was not reliable. Also, it had no effect on them at all right? Mo Xiaoyao was angry, but he did not let go of Yi Li's hand. He pulled her out of the imperial garden. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao did not speak to her and only continued to walk forward, Yi Li felt that something was strange. She had never seen Mo Xiaoyao angry before. It should be said that she had never seen Mo Xiaoyao angry with her before. She tugged at Mo Xiaoyao's hand that was holding hers. Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao tilted his head to look at her. He still did not speak. Yi Li helplessly sighed. All right, it was her fault. She should not have acted so careless. Chapter 251. Are you really angry? It's not that I don't care, it's just that it doesn't affect us, so I'm not that nervous. Yi Li couldn't help but despise herself in her heart. Mo Xiaoyao just didn't want to talk to her. What was she trying to explain? Of course she was angry that she was drugged in the palace, and she could guess who did it. She had even thought of a return gift. It was just that what the other party drugged her was a bit out of her expectations, so she acted a bit more casual. Why wasn't Mo Xiaoyao angry at the person who drugged him, but at her instead? Most importantly, why did she have to explain to him as if she was wronged? It doesn't affect you. Mo Xiaoyao raised Yi Li's beautiful face to look at himself. His deep eyes met with Yi Li's somewhat distressed eyes. Yi Li wasn't used to being in such a disadvantageous position. She struggled uncomfortably and said, yes, I know that the drug is said to have that effect, but we don't have it, and that statement doesn't seem to be reliable. Besides, I didn't drink it. Was Mo Xiaoyao really worried that she wouldn't be able to have children in the future after being drugged? Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's still low pressure, Yi Li thought in hindsight. Li, Prince Ding, Princess Ding, why are you here? Mo Xiaoyao was just about to speak when a cold female voice covered his voice. The two of them turned around at the same time. Not far away, under a white begonia tree, noble consort Liu, dressed in white, looked like a snow fairy. Noble consort Liu's gaze swept across Yi Li's body indifferently. It stopped on Mo Xiaoyao's body for a moment, and finally fell on their intertwined hands. Mo Xiaoyao didn't seem to care about noble consort Liu's gaze. He nodded indifferently and said, Noble consort Liu. I and Miss Li will be leaving the palace. Goodbye. A complicated expression flashed across noble consort Liu's cold face. She bit her red lips and looked at Mo Xiaoyao for a long time. Then she looked at Yi Li and said with a slight frown, Princess Ding, I have something to talk to Prince Ding alone. Yi Li raised her eyebrows in surprise. Shouldn't she ask Mo Xiaoyao if she wanted to talk to Mo Xiaoyao alone? Did noble consort Liu want her to take the initiative to avoid it? She was indeed the most favored imperial concubine in the palace. Just this aura alone was something that other imperial concubines could only look up to. Yi Li was about to speak when Mo Xiaoyao tightened his grip on her hand. Yi Li raised her head and saw Mo Xiaoyao's deep and angry eyes. She had to turn her head to noble consort Liu and say apologetically, I'm really sorry. Prince and I have something to do, so we have to leave the palace in a hurry. I'm afraid we don't have time to talk to you today. Noble consort Liu frowned and looked at Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, goodbye. Noble consort Liu's face turned pale. She clenched her hands tightly under her sleeves. She took a deep look at Yi Li and turned to leave without saying a word. Seeing noble consort Liu leave resolutely, Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao with some worry. She'll be okay, right? Yi Li had of course heard about noble consort Liu's feelings for Mo Xiaoyao. Although as far as Yi Li knew, these two people had never met alone. But it was undeniable that Mo Xiaoyao's merciless rejection made her feel much better. Let's go back. Mo Xiaoyao pulled her and turned around as if he didn't hear her question. After leaving the palace and returning to the mansion, Yi Li helplessly looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was still sullen and unwilling to speak, and sighed, Are you still angry? Was it so difficult to deal with a person who usually didn't like to get angry? On the way back, he didn't say a word. She was used to Mo Xiaoyao's gentle smile and voice. Once he was silent or no longer smiling, Yi Li found herself very uncomfortable. I know you're worried about me. It's my fault. I shouldn't have been so careless, okay? Yi Li comforted herself in her heart. He was throwing a tantrum. She couldn't lower herself to the same level as a person who was throwing a tantrum. God knew she really didn't mean to ignore this matter. Mo Jingqi, you wait for me. Mo Xiaoyao calmly glanced at her, then turned and walked to the side to sit down. Yi Li only felt the veins on her forehead throbbing. She had only heard of men coaxing women. Why was it different when it came to her? Mo Xiaoyao, do you have to be so childish? Fine, Yi Li, you have to be magnanimous. Xiaoyao, you're still angry. Then, I'll go to the study to deal with today's matter. Let's talk again after you've calmed down. Yi Li, who didn't know how to coax people, had no choice but to retreat. It wasn't that she was impatient or timid, but that Mo Xiaoyao's angry appearance really made her uncomfortable. His usually gentle and elegant handsome face was currently expressionless. He didn't look like he was going to be angry, but rather hurt. Seeing this, Yi Li couldn't help but wonder if she had really committed a heinous crime. If this continued, she might have to resort to all sorts of methods to beg for his forgiveness and make him happy. Therefore, Yi Li decided to retreat as soon as she sensed danger. Yi Li. One of her hands was pulled. Mo Xiaoyao used a bit of force to pull the escaping woman back into his embrace. Yi Li was a little embarrassed to find that their current position was a little ambiguous. Mo Xiaoyao sat on the stool, and she was pulled into his embrace. She had no choice but to sit on his lap. Although they had shared the same bed for quite some time, their relationship was absolutely innocent. Yi Li couldn't help but feel a little helpless in this situation. Mo Xiaoyao, can you let go of me first? Yi Li swallowed her saliva. She wanted to cry but had no tears. She didn't want to appear so useless. No matter who she faced, she could handle it with ease. However, when facing Mo Xiaoyao, she would occasionally doubt her own intelligence. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her quietly. His gaze was deep and sad. Yi Li, who do you think I am to you? Who? Yi Li wanted to cry but had no tears. She must be crazy to think that Mo Xiaoyao was sad. The most important thing for her to do now was to break free from Mo Xiaoyao and leave as soon as possible. Her intuition as a special forces soldier told her that if she stayed any longer, something bad would happen. Didn't we get married a long time ago? Of course I think of you as my husband. His deep eyes blinked. Then, have we forgotten something? Forgotten, what? Yi Li said blankly. Mo Xiaoyao leaned against her neck. His warm breath blew on her smooth neck. His elegant and clean breath made her feel hot and helpless. Consummate our marriage. Mo Xiaoyao said softly in her ear. Boom. Yi Li's mind seemed to have experienced a huge explosion. Her mind went blank. However, Mo Xiaoyao didn't intend to give her time to think. He lifted her small chin slightly and lowered his head to cover her soft lips. Mo Xiaoyao. Compared to the kiss outside shattered snowpass, Mo Xiaoyao was much gentler this time. However, it was this gentleness that made Yi Li unable to resist. They were probably the only couples who hadn't consummated their marriage after a year of marriage. Yi Li knew very well that Mo Xiaoyao was giving her time to mentally prepare herself. However, Yi Li didn't know if she was ready to accept Mo Xiaoyao. Or rather, did she fall in love with Mo Xiaoyao? Chapter 252. Test. Mo Xiaoyao faintly raised an eyebrow. Qingyu hurriedly nodded and said, medicines like musk aren't very harmful to ordinary people. It's impossible to achieve the effect of sterilization after 1 or 2 uses. But it is very dangerous for pregnant people. Dr. Shen also said after seeing the tea this servant brought back. If the princess consort is pregnant, just 1 sip of that tea is enough to miscarry. The study was silent for a moment. Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand. You can leave. You're the only one who understands medicine by Miss Li's side. Be more careful. This servant will leave. Qingyu secretly sighed in relief. She bowed and hurriedly left. When His Highness was angry, even if he didn't show it on his face, just the low pressure was not something that little girls like them could endure. Qingyu left. The study was silent. Mo Xiaoyao's usually gentle and deep eyes were full of haze. Mo Jingqi really knew how to plan ahead. He had just recovered and was already impatient to test Miss Li. Perhaps he also wanted to test if he had truly recovered. Or was he really so confident that he did not dare to touch him? Someone come. Prince. A grey-robed figure appeared in the study. Prince, we've already investigated. It was Wang Xiaorong who had people drug the tea. It is said that when the emperor was favoring Wang Xiaorong, he inadvertently mentioned the princess consort's children. Wang Xiaorong wanted to use this as a pretext to gain favor, so she drugged the tea. Mo Xiaoyao sneered. It's just Xiaorong. Her people have the ability to drug the empress tea. The grey-robed man naturally did not dare to answer. He also understood that the prince did not want to hear his answer. He only asked, Wang Xiaorong is scheming for the Prince Ding Mansion's children. Prince, should we? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. His smile was bone-chilling. No. Since she likes to drug the tea so much. When I get back, I'll have Qingyu concoct the medicine according to that cup of tea. I'll watch her drink it for 3 months. Prince. Wang Xiaorong might be pregnant. Do you not understand I's words? The grey-clothed man felt a chill in his heart. He hurriedly lowered his head and said, This subordinate obeys. In the bedroom, Yi Li slowly opened her eyes. The slight discomfort in her body made her frown. Recalling what had happened earlier, the scenes of their passionate entanglement flashed through her mind, and her face, which had become even more beautiful after the pleasure, suddenly flushed red. Yi Li helplessly patted her cheeks. She wrapped herself in the quilt and shook her head desperately, trying to get rid of the blushing images in her mind. The discomfort in her body made her moan uncontrollably. Yi Li, you're so useless and embarrassing. Yi Li couldn't help but grind her teeth as she thought of that bastard who had disappeared to who knows where. If she still couldn't figure out that he had done it on purpose, then she was an idiot. But this idiot had taken it for real at the time. She had panicked when she saw his sad appearance. She had apologized in every possible way, but to no avail. She had even lost herself. Although she didn't know where the impulse came from, she didn't oppose it. Li, are you awake? Gentle footsteps came from outside the screen. Yi Li raised her head to see Mo Xiaoyao standing at the head of the bed looking at her with a smile. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao standing in front of her, Yi Li glared at him and asked, Where did you go? Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows. He walked to the table and poured a cup of warm water to feed her. Yi Li quickly reached out to take it and drink it herself. Mo Xiaoyao didn't mind. He faintly smiled as he sat down by the bed and said, I was afraid of waking you up, so I went outside to look at some things. That's right. Han Mingxi came in the afternoon, so I had him stay in the guest courtyard first. Yi Li choked and swallowed the water in her mouth before saying, Han Mingxi is here? Why is he so fast? I'll go see him. His warm lips pressed against hers, blocking the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Their lips gently rubbed together for a while. Mo Xiaoyao took the teacup from her hand and put it to the side. He said in a low voice with a smile, Li, it's not too late to see him tomorrow. But Yi Li slightly frowned. Mo Xiaoyao didn't allow her to refuse. His index finger gently touched her delicate red lips. Li, if you care too much about other men, I'll get jealous. Yi Li's clear eyes flashed. She looked at him and said, So what if you're jealous? I'll get jealous. Maybe I'll want to kill him to silence him. Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. So you did it on purpose today? Yuan. Mo Xiaoyao didn't deny it. His Li was simply too smart. There was no point in denying it. I just thought today was a good day. Gently leaning into his embrace, Yi Li softly sighed and said, As long as you don't betray me, I won't betray you. Even if Mo Xiaoyao betrays the world, he won't betray Li in the end. Yi Li couldn't win against Mo Xiaoyao. Someone once said that when you get used to retreating from someone, it's very likely that you'll fall in love with them. Yi Li wasn't someone who liked to deceive herself. Mo Xiaoyao was her husband. Other than her blood relatives, he was the closest person to her in this world. She didn't want to deny the fact that she might have fallen in love with Mo Xiaoyao. Because even when she heard Mo Xiaoyao's deep words of love, she still felt joy from the bottom of her heart. In this kind of era, as a woman, What could make her happier than marrying someone who loved her and was loved by her? Young Master Han. When Yi Li stepped into the guest courtyard, Han Mingxi was sitting under a magnolia tree in a daze. The purple-red petals that fell in the breeze landed on his moon-white robes, creating a strange luxury. She was used to Han Mingxi wearing a flamboyant red robe no matter where he went. When she looked at the person in front of her, there was a strange feeling of alienation. Han Mingxi came back to his senses. Looking at the graceful woman slowly walking towards him, he couldn't help but be slightly dazed. But he quickly recovered. Junwei, Wang Fei. Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, "I'm not used to hearing you call me that." Han Mingxi raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "Even though Wang Fei keeps calling me young Master Han, but I'm not used to it. Also, in the future, Han Mingxi is Wang Fei's subordinate. If Wang Fei keeps calling me that, wouldn't it be strange?" Yi Li tilted her head and said with a smile, "Since that's the case, I'll call you Mingxi. You can do as you please. Is the Han family well?" Han Mingxi nodded. Han Mingyu has nothing to do with the Han family now. Even if something happens in the future, it won't affect the Han family. That's right, I've already sorted out the Han family's accounts. Wang, do you want to take a look? In the end, he still didn't want to use Wang Fei's distant title. Yi Li looked at him with some surprise and shook her head, saying, "Prince Ding and I don't have any intentions of swallowing up the Han family." Han Mingxi raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "Ding Wangfu is rich enough to rival a country. I naturally understand that Prince Ding doesn't care about the small Han family. But since I've already sworn loyalty, I naturally have to show some sincerity." Yi Li said with a smile, "Even if the Han family is truly loyal to the Prince Ding mansion, there's no reason to empty out the Han family. The Han family is still the Han family. The Han family's properties are still surnamed Han. Those accounts give me a headache just looking at them. So Mingxi should take back the Han family's accounts and slowly look at them. Ian, maybe you can talk to an and an San, Lin Han, and Zhuo Jing. They've also been looking at the accounts recently." Han Mingxi thought for a moment and then nodded with a smile, saying, "Understood. If there's anything you need me or the Han family to do in the future, just let me know." Yi Li nodded, "Very good. It just so happens that I have some new collaborations. If you've eaten breakfast, we can go to the study to talk. If you haven't, we can eat breakfast together." Chapter 253. I thought that you should be accompanying Prince Ding to have breakfast. Yi Li faintly said, "Prince Ding's internal energy is profound. He won't feel hungry even if he misses a meal." Thinking of a certain man who was insatiable, Yi Li lightly snorted in her heart. Not being angry didn't mean that she didn't hold a grudge. Han Mingxi turned back and saw that the woman behind him inadvertently revealed a charm that had never been seen before. His heart darkened as he turned and walked into the room. Then this one will have the honor to invite Princess Ding to have breakfast together. The matter of choosing relatives was pushed back by Yi Li. Ding Wangfu still closed its doors to guests and avoided the expected clamor. But there was still an endless stream of invitations sent to the Prince Ding mansion every day. Yi Li just casually glanced at it before putting it aside for Director Mo and Nurse Sun to handle. An and an San improved rapidly under the joint training of Director Mo and Han Mingxi. Although Han Mingxi had never been in charge of anything before, he was born in a business family and was smart. Even from what he had heard and seen since he was young, he was much stronger than ordinary people. Otherwise, Han Mingyu wouldn't have dared to hand the Han family over to him so confidently. Yi Li's so-called cooperation with the winter holidays was more of Yi Li coming up with an idea and providing a portion of the funds. And the specific operations would all be handled by Han Mingxi. By the time she was almost done with the discussion with Han Mingxi, it was already a matter of several days later. Yi Li thought of the Ding Wangfu's elites that she had thrown into the valley and didn't know how they were tortured. Looking at the time, she decided to go and see them first. Although Qin Feng didn't stay in the valley with his comrades these few days, his days weren't easy at all. After all, the princess consort had already proposed that the last team would be trained by him. Since that was the case, as the commander, He naturally couldn't be worse than his own subordinates. So that day when he returned to the manor, he went to consult and Ensan. It just so happened that Ensan was dizzy from all the books in the room and Qin Feng delivered himself to be the punching bag. Ensan didn't know how to be polite at all. Every day, the heavy and varied training made Qin Feng, the Black Cloud cavalry commander who was originally full of arrogance and looked down on the Shadow Guard, completely lose his temper. Once again, he followed Yi Li to the valley below Black Cloud Peak. Qin Feng had to admit that he was indeed curious as to what had happened to those elites. When they reached the bottom of the cliff, Qin Feng could not help but pinch a few of them when they saw their comrades crawling and rolling in the dust. This was simply too embarrassing for the Black Cloud cavalry and the Mohist army. Yi Li was still sitting on the roof, patiently waiting for the people who were running laps to finish. It wasn't until everyone returned to the yard with dusty faces that she jumped off the roof and asked with a smile, "Elites, how do you feel these days?" The elites' faces were all ashen. They were all expressionless. Could they say they were so tired they wanted to die? If someone had told them in the past that just running and doing some strange exercises could make them collapse from exhaustion, they probably wouldn't have believed it even if they were beaten to death. Who were they? They were the best Shadow Guard and soldiers in the entire Dhu state. How could they be stumped by such a small thing? Now they understood that the reason they felt running was not hard was because they had never seriously run before. In reality, the most unlucky Shadow Guard was so tired on the first day of running that he couldn't even crawl. Looking at the faces of the elites, Yi Li nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, "I've said it before, good martial arts does not mean good health does not mean good stamina, and good stamina does not mean good endurance." After a few days of training, I believe that everyone's stamina and endurance have improved greatly. I hope you can keep it up. In addition, add another 5 miles to your running every day, and add another 100 miles to your other activities. When these words were said, the people below could not help but cry out. Yi Li did not care and continued, "I don't need many of you to become peerless experts. I only need you to become the strongest soldiers. You will be the Mohist army, and even the elites of the elites in the entire Dhu state. Young master, do you mean that we will still return to the army, and will still be members of the Mohist army?" Someone below could not help but ask. This was also the doubt of everyone present. Most people were more inclined to think that Prince was preparing to train them to become a more powerful team than the Shadow Guard and the Secret Force. But they did not expect that they would still be soldiers, and from what young Master Chu meant, they would return to the Mohist army in the future. Yi Li said with a faint smile, "I cannot tell you right now, but I can guarantee that in the end, you will all have honorable titles. All of your promotions will be the same as the Black Cloud Cavalry and the Mohist army, or even better. When you reach the age where it is not suitable to stay, or if you are injured in an accident, you will be transferred to a place where the Mohist army or the Prince Ding mansion can reach." Everyone could not help but go into an uproar. Even the Black Cloud cavalry did not receive this kind of treatment. This made everyone even more curious as to what kind of army they would be. However, this is all on the premise that you can successfully stay here. Although I am a bit surprised that no one has fallen behind in these 7 days, but this is only the beginning. Qin Feng, this is the training plan for the next half a month. Qin Feng looked at the black and white paper as if he was looking at a death sentence. He slowly opened it and took a look. Qin Feng's brows knitted together. "Young master, this subordinate doesn't quite understand." Yi Li said with a smile, "It doesn't matter if you don't understand. From tomorrow onwards, Zhuo Jing and Lin Han will take turns to watch over them. Before they arrive, you can study the things on the drill ground by yourselves. In fact, the first month will be purely physical training, so I will not control you too much. Tomorrow, the 8 experts watching over you will also be leaving, so you will have to rely on yourselves. Also, when you are free, read the books I brought over. Read as much as you can. These will make the next 2 months easier for you." Qin Feng put down the paper in his hand, letting everyone admire it and at the same time have a rough idea of what to do. The soldiers who had been tormented these past few days silently vomited blood. With the addition of some new content, The amount of training was at least 50% more than before. This young Master Chu actually wanted to torture them to death, right? What was worse was that before, they only needed to complete missions. Now, the paper even required them to finish running in a certain amount of time. After these past few days of training, everyone had a rough idea of what to do. The requirements on the paper were too harsh even for these elite soldiers. Young Master Chu, this is impossible to complete. A soldier standing in the front row said in dissatisfaction. Yi Li glanced at him. She raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, impossible? That's right. Without using Qinggong, it is impossible to complete so many missions in such a short time. The smile on Yi Li's face deepened. Black Cloud Cavalry? I've never heard of you relying so much on martial arts. The ones who like to focus on martial arts should be the Shadow Guard. If someone can do it, what do you plan to do? The soldier proudly said, if someone can do it, then we can do it too. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction, very good. Gather at the drill ground. Seeing the soldiers line up and leave, Qin Feng looked worriedly at Yi Li and said in a low voice, Wang Fei, the one you're talking about isn't you, right? He believed that there was someone who could do it. Wang Fei would not deliberately use an impossible mission to tease them. But how could it be the delicate Wang Fei herself? Even though he knew that Wang Fei was very strong, it was just like Wang Fei had said. Good martial arts and good physical strength were two completely different things. And the things written on the paper clearly required physical strength and not martial arts. If something happened to Wang Fei, the prince would definitely cut him down. Chapter 254. Yi Li lowered her head and looked at the clothes on her body. In order to deal with such an unexpected situation, Yi Li had specially worn a suitable set of clothes. After all, she had a lot of experience in training. The reactions of these elites were basically what Yi Li had experienced when she was scolding people and when she was being scolded. Even if she guessed, she could guess a few things. The craftsmen in charge of the construction of this valley were very dedicated. The training field outside the courtyard was completely in line with Yi Li's requirements. A group of unconvinced soldiers stood on the drill ground and stared dumbfoundedly at young Master Chu, who was much taller than them and was also very skinny and weak, running calmly while carrying a few dozen kilograms of weight on his back. In the beginning, no one paid attention. However, when he ran 5 or 6 laps around the training field and his breathing was still stable, everyone finally realized that this young Master Chu was indeed not simple. After 10 laps, young Master Chu did not stop to rest. Instead, he directly rushed to the strange pile of things in the middle of the training field. He climbed over a low net that was covered with iron caltrops and all kinds of sharp objects. He climbed over a net rope that was more than 20 feet high and flipped over a wall that was more than 10 feet high. He grabbed the rope and swung over 20 feet before accurately landing on a piece of wood that was less than half a foot wide and 5 feet high. Under the shocked gazes of everyone, he rushed over as if he was running on flat ground. Finally, he rushed to the finish line. There were already bows and arrows placed there. Yi Li picked up the longbow and pulled the bowstring. She casually shot an arrow right at the center of the target. There was still some fine sand slowly flowing out of the hourglass that was placed at the side. Yi Li turned around and raised her eyebrows at the group of people in front of her. In her heart, she let out a long sigh of relief. Actually, the series of actions last night was still a bit difficult for the current her. Although she had not stopped training herself these past few years, and had been able to train herself without any hindrance after marrying into the Prince Ding mansion for a year. Even so, because of Mo Shuyao's guidance, she had made some progress in the ancient martial arts. However, it had been many years since she had completed such a series of actions. Fortunately, it was completed smoothly. If something went wrong in front of these fellows, it would not be easy to teach them a lesson in the future. Yi Li secretly moved her tired and stiff body, but on the surface, she smiled calmly. How is it? Good. The crowd was silent for a moment before bursting into cheers. However, what were they thinking before? This young Master Chu in front of them had easily done what they could not do, which was that he was stronger than them. Without a doubt, They all admired the strong. Then, everyone will listen to the instructor's instructions. And let me see your results in half a month. Yes, young master. Everyone replied in unison. After dismissing everyone, Yi Li's originally smiling expression immediately collapsed. He leaned against the balance beam and sighed bitterly. Qin Feng saw this and raised his eyebrows. This subordinate thought that it would be easy to be the princess consort. Yi Li waved her hand helplessly. No matter how easy it can't withstand not practicing for too long. I'm rusty. I almost fell from the top just now. As expected, I was too busy after coming back. I didn't even have a chance to familiarize myself with the field. But it's nothing. If you really go to the battlefield, who will give you time to familiarize yourself with the field? Qin Feng frowned and said in confusion, Princess, you don't have to work so hard. Yi Li smiled and said, Not really. Compared to testing this and that in the capital, I would rather stay here. If I don't work hard, will those arrogant fellows be convinced? This is just the beginning. In the future, I will have to scare them often to prevent them from being arrogant. Qin Feng couldn't help but rub his forehead. You have already dealt enough blows to them today, and you still want to scare them? I think so. I'm about to die from exhaustion. I'll rest for a while before returning home. Yi Li rubbed her arms and turned to walk into the small courtyard. That's right, I don't need to remind you what it means to keep it a secret, right? If the prince knows about what happened today, all your tasks will be doubled. Yes, princess. After returning to the capital, Mo Xiaoyao was busy dealing with the situation in the imperial court and the emperor's constant probing. Yi Li was busy dealing with the affairs of the prince's mansion and the elite training under the Black Cloud Peak. She put other things aside first. It wasn't until Murongting and Leng Haoyu came to visit Yi Li that she remembered that the war in Yongju was not over yet. Murongting and Leng Haoyu naturally came in the name of visiting Princess Ding. When they were in the border town, Murongting finally married Leng Haoyu under Murongshen's insistence. Now that she had returned to the capital, she had changed from the former eldest miss of General Murong's mansion to the second madam of the Leng family. Mo Xiaoyao definitely had something to do with Murongting marrying Leng Haoyu so quickly. For this reason, Yi Li felt a little guilty towards Murongting. It wasn't until she saw that Murongting was still radiant that she was relieved. It seemed that Murongting could still make her happy no matter what the situation was. With Leng Haoyu's infatuation for Murongting, he probably wouldn't bully her. Murong, young Master Leng, I'm really sorry for missing your wedding. Looking at Murongting, who was still dressed in red and in high spirits, Yi Li smiled apologetically. Murongting waved her hand indifferently and said with a smile, What's there to be sorry about? It's all my father's fault for wanting me. As she spoke, she glared angrily at Leng Haoyu, who was sitting beside her. However, there was obviously a different kind of coquettish pout in her eyes that had never been seen before. Leng Haoyu smiled at Murongting good-naturedly and didn't refute. Yi Li only shook her head faintly and smiled. Leng Haoyu was able to tolerate Murongting's temper so much. It seemed that he was indeed very affectionate. One must know that Leng Haoyu's temper wasn't much. Leaving Mo Xiaoyao and Leng Haoyu to discuss the matter, Yi Li pulled Murongting to the side and chatted. Murongting looked at Leng Haoyu and Mo Xiaoyao, who were sitting not far away, with some doubts. She wasn't stupid. Although she had been married to Leng Haoyu for less than a month, she still vaguely felt that the private Leng Haoyu was different from the person she used to know. Now that she saw him sitting together with Prince Ding and talking, with a serious and focused expression on his face that she had never seen before, Murongting was even more certain in her heart. If Leng Haoyu was really a good-for-nothing playboy, even if it was for Yi Li's sake, Prince Ding would never sit there and talk with him. Murong, what's wrong? Murongting looked at her with some doubts and said, Li are you hiding something from me? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at her with a smile. Who do you think is hiding something from you? Murongting said with some distress, I feel that Leng Haoyu is different from the person I used to know. Sometimes I wonder if I really know him. Although Leng Haoyu still acted as if he loved to eat, drink, and play as usual, he didn't care about worldly affairs. But they were husband and wife. How could Murong-ting not know that Lung Haoyu was busy in the study until midnight? Although no one knew what he was busy with. Yi Li looked at Murong-ting calmly and asked softly, Murong, do you feel happy after getting married? How are you getting along with second young master Lung? Chapter 255. Murong-ting was stunned. She blushed slightly and avoided Yi Li's gaze. She said hesitantly, this doesn't seem to be that bad. Well, they're right. I'll get married sooner or later anyway. He was chosen by father. Although he has been fooling around, father didn't say anything. This means that he shouldn't be that bad. And he's very good to me. Yi Li smiled. It seemed that second young master Lung's pestering for so many years was not in vain. Looking back at Lung Haoyu, who was talking to Mo Xiaoyao not far away and paying attention to this side, Yi Li said with a smile, since you're so curious, why don't you ask him yourself? Murong-ting said hatefully, he has been pretending to be crazy and stupid in front of me for so many years. Do you want me to ask him now? I don't like it at all. Yi Li didn't interrupt other couples. She just asked with a smile, have you gotten used to the Lung residence? Murong-ting's face immediately fell. She looked at Yi Li bitterly and said, not many people in this world are as lucky as you, Yi Li. Now I know why Lung Haoyu doesn't like the Lung family. It's simply not a place where normal people can stay. Murong-ting was full of resentment at the mention of her newly married in-laws. Now that she finally had someone to talk to, she naturally wouldn't hide it from Yi Li. She rattled on about what happened in the past few days when she returned to the capital. The Lung family was considered a very famous aristocratic family in the capital. In this generation, Lung Qingyu became the commander of the imperial guards in the capital at the age of 26. He could be said to be the emperor's confidant. Naturally, the entire Lung family had high hopes for him. In contrast, second young master Lung Haoyu, who was famous for being a playboy, was naturally not valued. But it wasn't until Murong-ting really married into the Lung family that she realized to what extent Lung Haoyu, the second young master, was not valued. Even the servants in the residence who had some reputation dared to gossip about Lung Haoyu. If it weren't for the master's indulgence, how could the servants have such guts? Murong-ting's character had never been one to swallow humiliation. Naturally, she could not stand these people. In the past few days, who knew how much trouble she had caused? However, the mistress of the Lung family, Lung Haoyu's mother in name, had never intended to stand on their side regardless of right or wrong. The fact that the eldest young master of the Lung family, whom Murong-ting adored, ignored and disdained her younger brother made Murong-ting very angry. No matter how careless she was, she could tell that there was no place for Lung Haoyu in the entire Lung residence. If he lived in such an environment, no one would have a good temper. Hearing Murong-ting's complaint, Yi Li smiled curiously and said, I remember that you used to have a good impression of young Master Lung. In the few times they met, Murong-ting couldn't help but compare Lung Qingyu and Lung Haoyu. Yi Li had never interacted with Lung Qingyu, but she had heard of this famous cold-faced young master in the capital. However, the Lung family was loyal to the emperor and was obviously not on the same path as the Prince Ding mansion, so there was no need to get in touch with them. Murong-ting lay weakly in the chair and looked at Yi Li pitifully. Isn't there a saying? You can only see from afar and not play with from close range. In the past, you naturally thought it was good from afar. But if someone despises you from head to toe for 3 meals a day, even if you don't look at them, you won't even look at them. Even when he looks at you like you're dirty, you can't give it to him. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. Is this how Lung Qingyu treats second young master Lung? Murong-ting shrugged. In fact, except for Lung Haoyu's father, his whole family treats him like this. I really can't bear to wear that damn place at all. Unfortunately, no matter what, I can't run back to the Murong residence by myself. Otherwise, who knows what rumors will spread if outsiders find out. But Lung Haoyu told me that after the wedding, he will tell his father that we will buy a courtyard outside and move out by ourselves. Will General Lung agree? Yi Li asked. As everyone knew, the Lung family paid great attention to their family style and reputation. Although Lung Haoyu, an unfilial son, often angered old General Lung. The most impressive thing about the Lung family in the capital was that old General Lung was the only one who didn't have a concubine among so many high-ranking officials in the capital. Both of his sons were born by Madame Lung. But at the same time, many people knew that second young Master Lung wasn't Madame Lung's biological son at all. Second young Master Lung's mother was Madame Lung's dowry maid. She passed away after giving birth to Lung Haoyu, so Lung Haoyu was raised under Madame Lung's name since birth. He was also considered the legitimate son of the general's mansion. It was just that Madame Lung spoiled second young Master Lung so much that he became the #1 playboy in the capital. Murong-Ting pursed her lips and said, "If Lung Haoyu says there's no problem, then there shouldn't be a problem. I don't want to be dragged along to lament how useless and bastard Lung Haoyu is every morning when I go to greet him." Did those people really think that she, Murong-Ting, was a fool? Not to mention that Lung Haoyu wasn't as bad as they said. Even if Lung Haoyu was really a playboy, she was already married. How could she not be able to distinguish between close and distant relatives? At most, she would throw Lung Haoyu into her father's army and let him teach him a lesson. She wasn't interested in discussing how bad her husband was with a group of idle women. Yi Li nodded and looked at Murong-Ting with a smile. "It's good that you can trust him. Since second young Master Lung said so to you, it means that he can really solve it. The most important thing between husband and wife is to trust each other." Murong-Ting blinked and looked at Yi Li with a smile. "Just like you and Prince Ding?" "Hee hee." That time in Yonglin, Prince Ding appeared on the battlefield at a critical moment and happened to save the princess consort. When I was in Yonglin, I heard a lot of people talking about it vividly. I'm afraid that it has spread throughout Jiangnan now. When I was in Yonglin City, those girls were so envious of Princess Ding. Yi Li rolled her eyes helplessly. On the other side, Mo Xiaoyao and Lung Haoyu finished their discussion and Lung Haoyu got up and prepared to leave. Although Murong-Ting was a little reluctant, she understood that they were all married now, especially Yi Li, who was very busy, so she didn't stay any longer and got up to leave with Lung Haoyu. Lung Haoyu looked at Mo Xiaoyao who was standing at the side and smiled at Yi Li. "Princess consort, Haoyu heard that the new patriarch of the Han family is now preparing for some hesitant new business, but I don't know if I have a chance to get involved." Yi Li glanced at Mo Xiaoyao and said with a smile, "Second young Master Lung is really well informed." Lung Haoyu didn't care and said with a smile, "As a businessman, I naturally have some business channels. I've embarrassed myself in front of the princess." Yi Li smiled generously and said, "Since young Master Lung is interested, why don't you go and talk to young Master Han? I'm a shopkeeper who doesn't know anything." Lung Haoyu said with a smile, "Princess consort's talent and ideas are always surprising. How can I say that I don't know anything? In that case, I thank Princess consort. Goodbye. I won't see you out." Murong-Ting looked at the two of them strangely. She didn't quite understand what business Lung Haoyu wanted to do. Since it was business with the Han family, why did he ask Li Er? But at least it proved that Lung Haoyu was also planning to do business, right? Chapter 256. After sending off Murong-Ting and Lung Haoyu, Yi Li turned back to look at Mo Xiaoyao, whose expression was somewhat ugly. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong? Did Lung Haoyu say something that made you unhappy?" Mo Xiaoyao reached out and pulled her into his embrace, lightly snorting. What else could it be other than the matter in Yongju? Liu Jingyun and Guan Ming, those two trash, had hundreds of thousands of troops under their command, but they were suppressed by Mo Jingli's mere 100,000 people and were unable to fight back. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. 100,000 people? Mo Jingli divided his troops to the east. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. That's right. Mo Xiaoyao recruited 200,000 troops from Lingju. He wanted to occupy the entire south of Yunnan River in the shortest time possible. Originally, it was nothing, but according to the news from Yongju, a very powerful person seemed to have appeared in Mo Jingli's army. A few days ago, he fought with Liu Jingyun and Guan Ming. Those two trash lost 3 battles. If General Murong hadn't sent reinforcements in time, I'm afraid Yonglin City would have been destroyed in their hands. The emperor is determined not to let the Mohist army go south to quell the rebellion. It's useless even if you're angry. Yi Li raised her hand and patted his arm to comfort him. Mo Xiaoyao sighed deeply. I know. Of course, he knew that Mo Jingqi would rather give up the entire south of Yunnan River to him than let the Ding Mansion's forces touch it. So now, the situation in the south had become a situation where they couldn't win the battles. The two trash had hundreds of thousands of troops but had no military achievements. As for the Prince Ding Mansion, since Mo Xiaoyao had arrived in time, no matter how much they hoped to lead the troops to the south, they could only watch anxiously from the sidelines. Liu Jingyun has never fought a battle, let alone lead hundreds of thousands of troops. That Guan Ming is also a trash. General Zhengguo was not feeling well and was recuperating at home. Old Duke Hua was old and did not have the emperor's trust. Not to mention the generals under the command of the Prince Ding Mansion. I'm afraid that even if Mo Jingli takes over the entire south, His Majesty won't let them onto the battlefield. Yi Li thought in a low voice. Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice, with General Murong looking after that trash, as long as he doesn't act smart, he should be able to hold on for a few months. But, once Mo Jingli truly takes over the south and turns around to deal with him, it will be his death. Yi Li frowned. With Mo Jingli's speed, you should still be in the northern tribes by then, right? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and snorted with anger. Forget it, if they want to mess around, let them mess around. I don't have time to pay attention to them right now. Mo Jingqi has something to do so he won't have to keep staring at the Prince Ding Mansion. Yi Li smiled helplessly. I'm afraid that no matter how many things he has to do, he won't forget about the Prince Ding Mansion. Since he likes to stare at the Prince Ding Mansion, I'll let him stare as much as he wants. Li, let's go out for a walk. With one hand around Yi Li's slender waist, Mo Xiaoyao chuckled softly and turned to lead her out. Yi Li looked out at the sky in confusion. It's getting dark, where are you going? Mo Xiaoyao smiled, you'll know when we get there. Walking in the endless stream of people, Yi Li, who had lived in the Chu capital for so many years, never knew that the Chu capital could be so lively at night. This was not a place that the rich and powerful of the capital liked to visit. Instead, it was a street where the common people gathered. At night, when the lanterns were lit, the sides of the street were filled with all kinds of simple and exquisite lanterns. On the street, people were walking in twos and threes, laughing and laughing. It really was a peaceful and happy scene. Yi Li lowered her head to look at the two's intertwined hands. Even though there were lanterns everywhere, they were not as bright as during the day. Most of the people on the street were common people, so the two of them did not attract much attention as they walked in the crowd. At most, people would occasionally look at the mask on Mo Xiaoyao's face and exclaim at the two's appearance. What day is it today? Looking at the joyous crowd, Yi Li leaned into Mo Xiaoyao's embrace and asked curiously. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand and carefully protected her in his embrace. He said softly with a smile, it's not a special day. Every month, there is a night market in the capital. On this day, the curfew will be 2 hours later than normal. So this is also a lively day in the capital. This is a tradition in the capital. Does Li not know? Yi Li was silent. She really did not know that there was such a day in the capital. Mo Xiaoyao turned his head to look at her and said with a smile, playing with these common people is completely different from playing with those rich and powerful people. When I was young, I would come here almost every month. So I always wanted to bring you here to see it. Yi Li raised her head to look at him and said with a faint smile, then if we have time in the future, we can come here every month as well. It's really boring in the capital. Looking at Yi Li's beautiful face under the lights, Mo Xiaoyao pulled her into his embrace and leaned against her shoulder as he gave a low laugh. All right, if Li Li likes it, we can come here every month. The passers-by saw a handsome and outstanding man carefully protecting a delicate and graceful woman in his embrace. Looking at the woman's clothes and hair, she was clearly a married woman. In the eyes of the crowd, this couple must be a newly married couple. They could not help but reveal a kind smile. Mo Xiaoyao held Yi Li's hand as he walked through the crowd with great familiarity. Although he had not been here for many years, the Lantern Festival did not seem to have changed much. Mo Xiaoyao still found his target with great familiarity. It was a small stall selling lanterns that looked simple and crude. The stall owner was an old man with white hair. He was currently carefully hanging the lanterns one by one on the side. But the old man was not young. He held up a beautiful lotus flower lantern and shakily tried several times, but was unable to hang it to the highest point. Mo Xiaoyao stood to the side and reached out to take the lantern from the old man's hands and hang it up. The old man was stunned at first. He turned his head and saw a noble and extraordinary man and woman standing in front of him. The old man looked at Mo Xiaoyao and could not help but frown. Many thanks to young master. This young master looks somewhat familiar. This old man seems to have seen young master somewhere before. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. In the past few years, I often came here and bought many lanterns from old Mr. No wonder old Mr. found me familiar. The old man waved his hand uneasily. This old man does not deserve the word Mr. Is young master bringing his wife to the lantern festival? Do you want to buy a lantern to play with? The word wife clearly made Mo Xiaoyao very happy. He turned his head to look at Yi Li and pointed to a pile of simple lanterns. I'll take these two. The old man looked at the two with some difficulty. Although the clothes of these two young masters and madams were not very extravagant, the old man had sold lanterns for most of his life. He had seen many people come and go. He could tell at a glance that these two were nobles. No matter how he looked at it, they did not look like people who would be interested in such simple lanterns. Yi Li also understood the old man's thoughts. She smiled faintly and said, I'll take these two. They look simple and elegant, but they are also unique. The old man saw that the two of them seemed to really want these two simple lanterns. He nodded and took the lanterns and handed them over. Yi Li took them in her hands. They were indeed very ordinary lanterns. The workmanship could be considered exquisite, but compared to the other strange flowers and birds, they were only average. Even the paper on the outside was made from ordinary white paper and some flowers were pasted on. Perhaps these two were made from the leftover materials after making other lanterns. Mo Xiaoyao took the lantern in Yi Li's hands and looked at it. He smiled at her and turned to pick up the brush and ink that the old man had placed at the side. After a moment, he stopped and nodded with satisfaction. He handed the lantern back to Yi Li. Yi Li lowered her head to take a look. She used the blank space on the original flower painting to draw a graceful woman. Some were holding scrolls, some were frowning, some were holding flowers, and some were holding swords. Although it was only a few strokes, it made people feel that the woman's graceful and beautiful appearance was vividly displayed on the paper. The originally monotonous and boring flower lantern suddenly became an exquisite and beautiful flower lantern. Chapter 257. Yi Li looked at the lantern in her hand, then looked at the other lantern on the side. She pursed her lips and smiled. She took the brush and began to draw on the other lantern. She clearly took longer than Mo Xiaoyao, but Mo Xiaoyao did not mind. He patiently stood to the side and waited for her to finish. When Yi Li handed the finished lantern to him, Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows in surprise. On the lantern, there was a man holding a spear and riding a horse with an extraordinary aura. Yi Li did not draw many words like Mo Xiaoyao did. The only thing on the painting was the man on the horse with an imposing aura like a god of war. This was the scene outside Yonglin City that day. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the lantern in his hand, the smile on his face deepened. Was I like this in Li's eyes at that time? Yi Li blushed slightly. She picked up her own beautiful lantern. My painting is not as vivid as Gong's. If you don't like it, then forget it. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, how could I not like it? I will definitely keep it well. Looking at the person on the lantern, Mo Xiaoyao's eyes were filled with joy. He never knew that in Li's eyes, he had such an extraordinary aura and sharp aura. After taking out some money to pay the old man who was watching the two of them draw their own lanterns, Mo Xiaoyao once again held Yi Li's hand and walked forward. The old man who was lost in thought looked down at the money in his hand that was worth an entire night of buying lanterns. His eyes flashed as he suddenly thought of something. His expression became excited. It's. In the end, he did not say what it was. The old man looked at the pair of figures that were gradually disappearing into the distance. A few years ago, there was also a high-spirited youth in embroidered clothes. Every month, he would come here to buy lanterns. But every time, the youth would only pick the most ordinary and worst one. But every time, he would give him enough money to buy a good lantern. After a long time, he realized that the young man had chosen the worst one because he was young and alone. He was worried that the bad ones wouldn't sell. However, that youth from a few years ago had never appeared again. Both of them had good hearing and extraordinary skills. Naturally, they heard the old man's mutterings after taking a few steps. Yi Li glanced at Mo Xiaoyao and said with a smile, "Prince, your identity has been seen through." Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly, "It's nothing. I used to come here often, but I didn't expect that old mister to recognize me." Mo Xiaoyao's life could be said to have been divided by the time he was 17 years old. From then on, he was in two completely different directions. If they weren't familiar with each other, it would be difficult to connect the two of them together. Yi Li lowered her head to look at the freshly painted lantern in her hand, which was still emitting the fragrance of ink, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. The two of them carried lanterns and strolled leisurely along the streets with many other young men and women. Their extraordinary appearance and temperament attracted many curious and envious gazes, but compared to the probing and calculating gazes of the nobles in the palace, it made them feel much better. Yi Li walked as she curiously looked at the various small stalls on both sides of the street. The things sold there weren't all that good. They were all for the common people. Although they were simple and unadorned, they made people feel closer to nature. Mo Xiaoyao smiled as he pulled Yi Li to a stall selling jewelry, rouge, and face powder. The small stall naturally didn't have anything valuable. The middle-aged couple who set up the stall could see that the man and woman in front of them were not ordinary people. Although they might not be interested in their things, they still tried to sell them. Mo Xiaoyao picked up an elegant pearl hairpin and looked at Yi Li. He shook his head and put it back. A slender hand picked up the hairpin again and met Mo Xiaoyao's eyes. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and asked with a smile, "What is it?" Mo Xiaoyao sighed softly and said, "This hairpin will only be overshadowed by Li. Li is suited for the brightest pearls. A few days ago, I ordered some luminous pearls from Fenghua Tower. Tomorrow, let's go see what style you like." Yi Li held the simple hairpin in her hand and looked at it. She smiled and said, "Even if you aren't afraid that I will squander all your family's wealth, I'm afraid that the noble ladies in Jing will kill me with their gazes." Fenghua Tower's jewelry was famous in the Chu capital for being expensive. Even if the noble ladies had a few pieces, it would be worth showing off. But others did not know, but Yi Li knew. Ever since her wedding, almost all of her jewelry had been ordered from Fenghua Tower. It was no wonder that even though Yi Li rarely went out and would try to choose some low-key jewelry, there were still many people who would pay attention to the jewelry she wore. If you can squander all your family's wealth just by buying a few pieces of jewelry, then it can only be said that our family's wealth is too thin. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile. He took the hairpin from Yi Li's hand and gently put it on for her. He said softly, "I hope that Li gets the best." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "If you like it, then it's the best. If you don't like it, then it's worthless no matter how good it is." A faint smile flashed through Mo Xiaoyao's eyes. He asked in a low voice, "Then does Li like it?" It was just a simple like. She didn't know if he was talking about the hairpin or something else. Yi Li blushed slightly. She turned her face and said in a low voice, "It's not bad." After paying, they listened to the compliments of the couple who had set up the stall. The two of them did not pay it any mind. They held hands and turned to leave. As they walked, Mo Xiaoyao turned his head to look at the woman next to him. The inconspicuous pearl hairpin seemed to sparkle with a moving light in her black hair. "What's going on over there?" Yi Li looked ahead. There was a lot of noise in that direction. Most of the people were moving in that direction. At a glance, she could only see a dense crowd. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, "There's probably something going on. Let's go take a look and we'll know." Handing the two lanterns to the person following behind them, Mo Xiaoyao pulled Yi Li towards the crowd. Yi Li turned her head to look at the unfamiliar guard holding the two lanterns. She frowned and said, "I almost forgot. Ever since I came back, I haven't seen Jin." Jin had always been a man of few words. Even when he was at Mo Xiaoyao's side, he was expressionless as he pushed the wheelchair. Now that Mo Xiaoyao's legs were fine, Jin seemed to have been forgotten. Mo Xiaoyao turned his head and said with a smile, "I told him to do something else. He's grown up. He can't always be by my side as a guard." Yi Li nodded. Jin was Chief Steward Mo's nephew. Chief Steward Mo had worked hard for the Wang Fu and had no children. Jin's parents had also died for the Prince Ding mansion. Mo Xiaoyao should take extra care of Jin. After squeezing into the crowd, they saw that there was a stage set up at the corner of the street. The stage was decorated with colorful satin, making it look bright and eye-catching. There was no one on the stage, but the crowd below the stage was clearly excited. Yi Li looked at the middle-aged man beside her whose face was red with excitement. She asked softly, "What's going on here?" The middle-aged man turned his head and saw a beautiful woman standing beside him. He couldn't help but be surprised. He said with a pleasant expression, "The #1 courtesan in the capital, Miss Yarrow Ji, is going to dance here. And she's going to throw the embroidered ball." Halfway through, he seemed to remember that the person in front of him was a beautiful woman. The man's face turned red and he didn't say much. Even though he didn't say it clearly, it didn't stop Yi Li from understanding. Slightly surprised, Yi Li turned her head to look at Mo Xiaoyao in confusion and asked, "The Miss Yarrow he's talking about, isn't the one I know?" Chapter 258. It seems to be true, Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. Yi Li frowned. Although she had only seen Yaoji twice, she had a good impression of the woman. Speaking of which, Yaoji was not only a dancer, but also the owner of the #1 Qingcheng Lane in the capital. Although a dancer was a lowly person, Yaoji's family was probably not inferior to some rich businessman in the capital. Such a woman obviously didn't need to throw an embroidered ball to find a groom or choose a guest. Moreover, she chose this place. Although there were many people here, most of them were ordinary people. If Yaoji wanted to choose an ordinary person to live with, she shouldn't be so high profile. Seeing her frown, Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile, "It is said that Yaoji and Mu Yang have a close relationship. Next month, Mu Yang will marry the granddaughter of Minister Sun of the Ministry of Rights. I don't know if this has anything to do with it." Yaoji and Mu Yang? Yi Li still remembered that she had seen Mu Yang 2 or 3 times. Although they didn't talk, she could see that he was an extremely outstanding man from afar. Yi Li had also heard the rumors about Yaoji, Mu Yang, and Feng Zhiyao. However, with her understanding of Feng Zhiyao, this rumor was probably exaggerated. She didn't expect that Feng Zhiyao was a fake and Mu Yang was a real one. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "Yaoji was famous in the capital when she was 13 years old. It has been nearly 10 years since then. If it weren't for Feng San and Mu Yang's protection, it wouldn't be so easy for a weak woman like her to support Qingcheng Lane and not be harassed by influential people. Those powerful people in the capital aren't easy to deal with." Yi Li nodded. Yaoji's beauty was definitely in the top 5 in the capital. More importantly, compared with the graceful and dignified appearance of ordinary rich ladies, Yaoji, who was skilled in singing and dancing, had a different kind of seductive and enchanting temperament. Such a stunning beauty was still in the midst of the dust. How could she not be the target of those high officials, dignitaries, and playboys? Even though Yaoji was a clean woman, how could a powerless and weak woman resist those wild bees and butterflies without anyone's help? Yi Li couldn't understand Yaoji's idea. Even if it was really related to Mu Yang, it was too irresponsible to decide her future in this way. If it was a martial arts competition or a literary competition, they could at least test the other party's ability. However, throwing the embroidered ball was completely a gamble of luck. Yi Li still vaguely remembered some TV dramas she had seen in her previous life where a rich young lady threw an embroidered ball and caught it by a beggar. Yaoji deliberately chose such a place. Even if she would not be picked up by beggars, It was more likely that she would be picked up by ordinary people. However, even if an ordinary person were to marry Yaoji legally, there would be no benefits for either side. Don't worry, there's no way Mu Yang wouldn't know about this, Mo Xiaoyao said softly. Yi Li nodded and looked around. Unfortunately, she didn't see Mu Yang. The matter between a man and a woman was hard to say. No matter whether Mu Yang would appear here or not, no one could say whether he was right or wrong. After all, he was going to get married next month. Not only did he have to be responsible for Marquis Mu Yang's household, he also had to be responsible for his fiancée. Miss, is this your brother or? The man standing beside Yi Li suddenly asked in a low voice. Yi Li looked back and found that many men around were looking at Mo Xiaoyao with unkind eyes. She couldn't help but smile. Although Mo Xiaoyao was wearing a mask, the exposed half of his face was still handsome. Moreover, his posture was outstanding. Standing in the crowd, he stood out. How could the surrounding men not be hostile? Holding Mo Xiaoyao's hand, Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "We're just watching. My husband won't snatch it." Everyone's eyes were obviously filled with disbelief. Although the woman in front of them was not inferior to Miss Yaoji, no man would dislike having more beautiful women. This girl was elegant and noble. Obviously, she was the wife of a noble family. Wasn't she just lacking an enchanting and charming concubine like Miss Yaoji to enjoy the fortune of being surrounded by beauties? Mo Xiaoyao was in a good mood and didn't care about the rudeness of these people. He pulled Yi Li in front of him and smiled at the man who asked the question. "Don't worry. I'm not here to snatch the embroidered ball. My wife is very fierce." Yi Li's face suddenly darkened. She reached out her hand and pinched him hard. Mo Xiaoyao's expression was as usual, as if Yi Li didn't pinch his flesh. He smiled at the man opposite him and said, "And I don't like women who are too enchanting. I prefer a gentle and graceful woman like my wife." The gentle and graceful woman secretly picked up a bit of flesh on his waist and pinched hard. Mo Xiaoyao helplessly smiled bitterly. He raised his hand and pressed Yi Li's hand. "Wife, I really don't like other women." Yi Li rolled her eyes and silently let go. What was that saying again? Hooligans were not scary, but hooligans with culture were scary. No one could resist a person who was usually gentle and elegant when he was thick-skinned. The men around finally seemed to be relieved. They all gave Mo Xiaoyao an understanding smile. Mo Xiaoyao didn't stand on ceremony. He smiled and nodded, accepting the kindness of the people one by one. "Oh, Miss Yaoji has come out?" someone exclaimed. Yi Li looked back. The beautiful woman on the stage was wearing a colorful dress. Her makeup was stunning and her smile was enchanting. She caused an uproar as soon as she appeared. Yaoji nodded slightly to the audience and smiled sweetly. The men under the stage were so excited that they shouted one after another. Yaoji's eyes swept over the place where Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao were standing. She was slightly stunned. She smiled faintly at Yi Li and then turned around and waved her long sleeves. The music on the side of the stage sounded leisurely. Yaoji slowly swayed her waist and danced with the music. The audience applauded again. Yi Li frowned. She looked at the woman on the stage with a bright smile and sighed secretly. Yaoji didn't want to throw the embroidered ball. She was simply deliberately ruining her reputation. Yaoji's reputation in the capital was not bad. Although it was said that she had an ambiguous relationship with Fengshan and Mu Yang, it was only a rumor. No one had really seen her. Besides, not many people could see Yaoji in person. But now she was dancing and throwing the embroidered ball in such a place. Probably after today, more than half of the men in the capital would know what Yaoji looked like. Today, whether it was the high officials and dignitaries who wanted to marry her as a concubine or the ordinary people who wanted to marry her as a wife, their opinion of her would be lowered to a lower level. Looking up at the sadness that flashed across the woman's face on the stage, Yi Li shook her head secretly. Was it really because of Mu Yang? When the song was over, the people under the stage shouted one after another, urging Yaoji to throw the embroidered ball quickly. A middle-aged woman with makeup and a smile on her face came to the stage. She raised her hand to signal the audience to be quiet and said with a smile, "You are lucky today. Today, Miss Yaoji personally threw the embroidered ball to choose a groom. The one who catches the embroidered ball is our Miss Yaoji's groom tonight. I wish you good luck here." Yi Li's heart sank. She heard clearly what the procuress said about the groom tonight. That was to say, Yaoji didn't really want to marry but just wanted to choose a groom. It also meant that after tonight, Yaoji would no longer be a stripped-down dancer who only sold her skills but not her body. Looking at the beautiful woman with bright eyes standing on the stage, Yi Li sighed regretfully. Mo Xiaoyao asked in a low voice, "What's wrong, Miss Li?" Chapter 259. Yi Li shook her head and said, "Miss Yaoji's action is too decisive. Why do you have to?" Yi Li was asked if she could go to this extent for a man. Yi Li knew very well that she absolutely could not do what Yaoji did. It was not because she didn't love him, but her love had a bottom line. If she could even abandon her dignity, this kind of love would be too heavy for Yi Li. Mo Xiaoyao leaned over to Yi Li's ear and whispered, "I will never let Li be like this. I will remove all obstacles and let Li be Mo Xiaoyao's only wife." Yi Li raised her eyebrows. "Prince is very good at saying nice things today. You like it? I will say it every day." Mo Xiaoyao smiled. "Don't worry. Muyang is a little stupid, but he is kind. He will definitely come." Yi Li nodded. So what if he came? Muyang would never marry Yaoji, nor would he give up Marquis Muyang's mansion for Yaoji. And Miss Sun, she was also the most innocent one. On the stage, Yaoji was holding a colorful embroidered ball and looking at the audience with a smile. The men under the stage all stared at the small embroidered ball excitedly. As long as they got it, they could spend a night with the best dancer in the capital. It was absolutely a great temptation for these ordinary men who would only look at Yaoji once. Yaoji's eyes fell on Yi Li. She raised her eyebrows and smiled sweetly at her. Yi Li frowned and had a bad feeling in her heart. Before she could figure it out, Yaoji raised the embroidered ball and threw it in her direction. The crowd exclaimed, and those who were far away could only curse in frustration. Those who were close all stared at the embroidered ball in the air and raised their hands high to catch the good luck falling from the sky. From the moment Yaoji raised her hands, Yi Li knew where she wanted to throw it. Of course, Yaoji didn't want to throw the embroidered ball to herself, but to Mo Xiaoyao who was standing behind her. After the embroidered ball left her hand, Yaoji raised her eyebrows and moved her lips silently. Although there was no sound, it wasn't difficult for Yi Li who was good at lip reading. What she said was, "Do you think he'll accept it?" Yi Li cursed in her heart. She turned around and wanted to pull Mo Xiaoyao away. Normally, with their skills, they wouldn't have to worry about not being able to avoid a small embroidered ball. But now, the two of them were surrounded by people. It was difficult for them to even move their feet, let alone avoid it. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at Yi Li, who was tugging at his collar, and chuckled. He raised his hand and slapped the embroidered ball that was flying towards him. The embroidered ball immediately changed direction and flew to the other side. As the embroidered ball deviated from its direction, the crowd rushed to the other side. Mo Xiaoyao held Yi Li in his arms to protect her from being squeezed by the crowd. He asked with a smile, "Were you nervous just now, Miss Li?" Yi Li snorted and raised her head to look at the stand. Yaoji didn't look disappointed when she saw her embroidered ball being slapped away. Instead, she smiled more charmingly at Yi Li and said silently, "Congratulations." Yi Li nodded slightly and accepted her congratulations. The colorful embroidered balls were fought over in the crowd. Often, before a person could grab them, they would be slapped away or taken away by the person next to him. The fierceness of the fight for the embroidered balls was amazing. It was just a small embroidered ball. No matter how many people fought for it, it couldn't be fought over endlessly. Just when a burly man, who thought he was better than others, reached out to grab the embroidered ball, an outstanding figure stepped on the shoulders of the crowd and flew over. He kicked away the burly man's hand and at the same time, kicked the embroidered ball towards the woman standing on the stage. In the disappointed exclamation of everyone, A swift figure quickly flew onto the stage and caught the embroidered ball before it fell on Yaoji. On the stage, a young man dressed in a brown brocade robe was standing leisurely beside Yaoji. His handsome face was angular, and he looked more boorish and straightforward than the men from Great Chu. However, the sharp gleam in his eyes, which seemed to be smiling, made people know that he was not one of those warriors who were all brawn and no brains. The man casually played with the embroidered ball in his hand. He smiled at the man who had fallen into the crowd below the stage and said, "Since you don't like Miss Yaoji, you can just stand aside and watch. It's rude to kick her embroidered ball back like this. It's said that Dachu State is a land of literature and etiquette. You're too rude to the beauty." The man in the crowd, Mu Yang, the heir of Marquis Mu Yang's household, flew onto the stage with a sullen face. He didn't say a word and slapped the man in brown. The man in brown was obviously prepared and easily dodged to the side. The two of them fought back and forth on the stage. The people below the stage also cheered. Since he couldn't get the beauty's favor, he didn't lose anything by watching the show. Ordinary people didn't have much, so it wasn't easy for them to have too many obsessions. Yi Li leaned in Mo Xiaoyao's arms and curiously looked at the man fighting with Mu Yang on the stage. She could tell from his appearance that he was definitely not from Dachu State. From the northern tribes. Yi Li didn't have a good impression of the northern tribes. The last time was at the wedding last year. The 13th prince of the northern tribes had left a very bad impression on her. This time, he was in the mood to come to this kind of place to play. Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Previously, there was news that the northern tribes had sent someone to escort the bride to Dachu State. I didn't expect him to arrive in the capital so quickly. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and turned to look at him. You know him? Yelu Yi, the 7th prince of the northern tribes. Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice. Mu Yang probably isn't his match. Yi Li nodded slightly. She could tell from just a few moves. Mu Yang's martial arts were not bad, but it couldn't compare to Yelu Yi's, which was obviously honed on the battlefield. Mu Yang couldn't be blamed. Although Dachu State worshipped martial arts, it also worshipped literature. Most influential families tended to let their children walk the path of an official rather than the battlefield. After all, swords have no eyes on the battlefield. Who knows when you might lose your life? Mu Yang was able to cultivate both literature and martial arts at such a young age. It wasn't easy for him to have such achievements in martial arts. But the northern tribes was completely different from the Dachu State. Although they were influenced by the culture of the Central Plains, their culture was still valiant and the strong were respected. And Yelu Yi was one of the most outstanding sons of the northern tribes. Naturally, he had risked his life on the battlefield since he was a teenager. After less than 100 moves, Mu Yang started to lose ground. And Yelu Yi was clearly in high spirits. The more he fought, the braver he became. His fierce attacks forced Mu Yang to retreat again and again. Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao and couldn't help but frown. She didn't want to let Mo Xiaoyao go on stage. No matter if he won or lost, there would be a storm in the end. But at the same time, whether it was her or Mo Xiaoyao, they couldn't watch Yelu Yi injure Mu Yang. Yaoji was originally a bit absent-minded, but when she saw that Mu Yang was about to lose, she finally came back to her senses. She said in a flustered and exasperated tone, "I told you to meddle in other people's business. I'm running my embroidered ball, what does it have to do with you?" Yelu Yi laughed loudly. "Miss Yaoji is right. Young Master Mu, since you kicked the embroidered ball back, what is the meaning of this now?" Chapter 260. Mu Yang glanced at Yaoji, still silently dealing with Yelu Yi's relentless attacks. Even those below the stage who don't know martial arts can see he's having a hard time. Yelu Yi coldly snorted, seeming to have finally lost his patience. He laughed. "Since the heir has nothing to say, then don't disturb this one's intimacy. Go." With a low shout, Yelu Yi's palm slapped towards Mu Yang's chest. This palm's momentum is forceful, clearly with the power to split mountains and split rocks. Standing on the side, Yaoji couldn't help but cover her mouth and scream, "No! The stage itself isn't big, Yaoji is also close to the two." Seeing Mu Yang in danger, Yaoji cried out in alarm and used all her strength to throw herself forward. She's been practicing martial arts since she was a child. Her body's agility doesn't lose to ordinary martial arts practitioners. In this moment of desperation, she actually threw herself between Mu Yang and Yelu Yi. Yelu Yi's palm was about to hit Yaoji's body. The audience below the stage couldn't help but close their eyes, not daring to watch. Just now when the two fought, the things on the stage were smashed to pieces. If this palm landed on Yaoji's body, a delicate beauty like her would immediately die. Whoosh! A lustrous light flashed by. Yelu Yi only saw a lustrous light flash in front of his eyes. He quickly withdrew his palm and retreated several steps back. Yaoji's face was deathly pale, falling right into Yelu Yi's arms. She originally closed her eyes and waited for death, but found that the palm didn't hit her. Opening her eyes, she just happened to see Mu Yang's eyes containing worry and anger. Thinking about the two's current situation, her heart darkened and she stood up to leave. Yelu Yi stood with his hands behind his back, glancing sideways at the pearl hairpin nailed to a pillar. Although it's just an ordinary silver pearl hairpin, the entire hairpin is deeply embedded, leaving only a pearl flower on the outside. It's clear the opponent's skill is profound. If he didn't withdraw his palm in time, Yelu Yi believes this hairpin would have pierced his wrist. Looking back at the source of the concealed weapon, he saw a young man and woman dressed in simple yet elegant clothes. The woman was elegant and graceful, but there was an air of elegance and nobility about her that was different from the women of Dhu state. The man's face was covered by a mask, but his moon-white robes made him seem like a bright moon. He was cultured and refined, but in fact, he was extraordinary. Raising his brows, Yelu Yi chuckled, "This young master already has a beauty in his arms. Could it be that you're still interested in Miss Yaoji?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, "Prince Yelu must be joking. My wife is pure and kind by nature, she can't stand the sight of blood. It doesn't matter if the prince doesn't know how to control his strength on a whim, but it wouldn't be good if he scared my wife." Hearing this, Mu Yang turned his head in surprise. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li in the crowd, he couldn't help but stare blankly. He nodded slightly, not opening his mouth to expose the two's identities. Yelu Yi didn't expect his identity to be exposed. Narrowing his eyes, he sized up Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. After a while, he smiled and said, "So I didn't expect to see Prince and Princess here, it's really a pleasure." Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, "I also didn't expect to see Prince Yelu in this kind of place." Yelu Yi smiled but didn't say anything, avoiding Mo Xiaoyao's question of him sneaking into the Chu capital. Pointing at Yaoji, he said with a smile, "Since Prince doesn't intend to fight over Miss Yaoji, does that mean Miss Yaoji still belongs to me? Don't even think about it." Mu Yang said in a low voice, walking in front of Yaoji and shielding her behind him. Yelu Yi sneered disdainfully, looking at Mu Yang with a smile that wasn't a smile. Why doesn't Shizi Mu ask Miss Yaoji's opinion? Perhaps Miss Yaoji is more willing to choose the stronger one? Yaoji silently walked out from behind Mu Yang. Under Mu Yang's shocked gaze, she walked behind Yelu Yi. "Yaoji, you." Yaoji smiled faintly, but her expression was a bit bitter. She said softly, "Today's rules were set by Yaoji, so Yaoji naturally has to abide by them. I've troubled Shizi Mu to make a trip here, so it can be considered as completing our friendship over the years. Shizi Mu, please go back." Mu Yang stared at her stunning face, not saying a word for a long time. The smile on Yaoji's face gradually stiffened. Finally, she turned around and didn't confront him. At this time, the sky was already dark, close to the curfew. The people below the stage saw that there was no more excitement to watch, so they all left in disappointment. On the stage, Yelu Yi smiled at Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao. "Prince, Princess, today's meeting is also fate. How about we find a place to drink a cup of wine and catch up?" Mo Xiaoyao led Yi Li over, smiling faintly. "Prince Yelu has a beauty in your arms, yet you still have the mood to catch up with I?" Yelu Yi's eyes flashed with sharpness. He smiled and said, My good-for-nothing younger brother accidentally offended Prince last year. Fortunately, Prince was magnanimous and didn't pursue the matter, allowing him to safely return to the northern tribes. This little prince was just about to personally thank Prince. Mo Xiaoyao nodded magnanimously. Those who come are guests. I am not a petty person. Prince Yelu doesn't need to take this small matter to heart. Mo Xiaoyao didn't have the slightest bit of guilt for making the already foolish Yelu Ping even more foolish. In fact, to be able to let him return alive, Mo Xiaoyao felt that his self-cultivation these past few years was not bad. Yelu Yi choked, wishing he could slap Mo Xiaoyao to death. If Mo Xiaoyao had directly killed Yelu Ping, perhaps he wouldn't be so angry. But he sent Yelu Ping to his sworn enemy, the Crown Prince. Not only that, he also let people leak information to him. He was worried that Yelu Ping would leak some of his secrets to the Crown Prince, so he could only use all his means to get him back from the Crown Prince, who knew that the person he saved was a fool who didn't know anything. Of course, he absolutely believed that Mo Xiaoyao had already dug out everything he knew before he made Yelu Ping stupid. If half of the people of the Ding King's Fu were left in this world, it would be a disaster. Fu Wang didn't lie to me. This is Princess Ding. This one is the 7th prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Yi. Wang Fei greets you. Knowing that he couldn't win against Mo Xiaoyao, Yelu Yi didn't make things difficult for himself. He cleanly changed the target and smiled at Yi Li. Yi Li stood next to Mo Xiaoyao and said with a light smile, Prince Yelu greets you. Yelu Yi impudently examined Yi Li and said, on the way to the Chu capital, I heard that Wang Fei is a woman who doesn't lose out to men. I thought you were such a graceful beauty. Prince Ding really has good fortune. Mo Xiaoyao's eyes darkened, a trace of anger flashing past but quickly disappearing. He smiled at Yelu Yi and said, Prince Yelu praises me too much. This isn't the place to talk. Prince Yelu, do you want to come to my humble home for a visit? Looking down the stage, it was only a quarter of an hour until the curfew. The crowd on the streets had already dispersed. Only the few of them were left on the lively and festive stage. It looked a bit strange. Yelu Yi smiled without batting an eyelid. Prince Ding's invitation is this one's honor. But it's already late. It's really rude to visit the Ding King's Fu. This one will definitely pay a visit to Prince and Wang Fei on another day. Going to the Ding King's Fu for a visit at this time, Yelu Yi believed that as long as there wasn't anything wrong with the brain, they wouldn't make this decision. Seeing him refuse, Mo Xiaoyao didn't force him. Since it's like this, I and Miss Li will take our leave first. Prince Yelu and Mu Shizi. Chapter 261. Yelu Yi smiled. This little prince also needs to return to the inn. As for Miss Yaoji, it was just a joke. I hope Miss Yaoji and Master Mu won't take offense. Mu Yang was stunned for a moment as if he didn't expect Yelu Yi to let go so easily. Yaoji also looked at Yelu Yi with some surprise. Yelu Yi didn't care, waving his hand. This one saw Master Mu's skills and was itching for a fight. If I offended you, please forgive me. Since the other party said so, Mu Yang naturally wouldn't pursue the matter. He nodded. Prince Yelu's skills are better, please excuse me. Yelu Yi raised his eyebrows and was about to speak when a cold light flashed from the corner of the street. Several black-clothed men rushed over. Yelu Yi tilted his head to avoid the oncoming blade light and casually slapped the assassin away. At the same time, he turned to Mo Xiaoyao and smiled. Prince, turns out Chu Capital's knights are so dangerous. Mo Xiaoyao hugged Yi Li with one hand and grabbed the hand of an assassin with the other. With a slight force, the crisp sound of bones breaking in the middle of the night could be heard. Maybe it's because the tourists came from afar. After all, I remember that the capital's knights were very peaceful. Yelu Yi laughed and didn't refute. On the other side, Mu Yang was protecting Yaoji while fighting the enemy. Yaoji's body was a bit stiff. Although she didn't want Mu Yang to touch her again, she knew that now wasn't the time to be willful. She could only stay motionless and let Mu Yang hold her in his arms. However, the expression on his face was one of sadness. He had avoided the fear of encountering an assassin. The assassins obviously also noticed that the three men in front of them were all experts. However, Mo Xiaoyao and Mu Yang were each protecting a woman. Only Yelu Yi didn't have any worries and naturally went on a killing spree. The assassins secretly looked at each other and turned to attack Mo Xiaoyao and Mu Yang. As long as these two men were taken care of, the remaining one would naturally be easy to deal with. Yelu Yi, who had been pushed to the side, raised his eyebrows. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao's side was handling the situation with ease, he turned around and charged towards Mu Yang's side. Yi Li helplessly allowed Mo Xiaoyao to pull her into his embrace. Although she knew that Mo Xiaoyao was more than capable of dealing with the assassin before them, she was not used to being protected in his embrace. However, Mo Xiaoyao's hand around her waist told her that Mo Xiaoyao had no intention of letting her go. Yi Li could only sigh helplessly, carefully watching the surrounding assassins just in case. He didn't know who these assassins were, but they didn't look like much. Yi Li thought uninterestedly. She had nothing to do. After marrying into the Ding King's residence, needless to say, she must have encountered many assassins. In Yi Li's eyes, these assassins were only mediocre. Seeing the three men take care of the assassins without much effort, Yi Li slightly frowned. Rather than calling it an assassination, it was more like they were putting on a show for someone to see. Not to mention the presence of these three people, there was also the shadow guard in the Prince Ding mansion. Yelu Yi couldn't really go out without guards. Even if it was just one of these three men, these assassins wouldn't be able to deal with them. Be careful. After the last assassin was taken care of by Yelu Yi, Yaoji immediately pushed Mu Yang away and retreated far away. Mu Yang looked at Yaoji, who was far away from him, and froze for a moment. He could only smile bitterly and turn around to thank Yelu Yi. Behind him, a fish that slipped through the net took the opportunity to shoot a hidden weapon at Yaoji. Yi Li cried out in alarm and grabbed a jade pendant from Mo Xiaoyao's waist. With a whoosh, the hidden weapon flew out and the jade pendant fell to the side and broke into several pieces on the ground. Wang Fei has good technique. After casually dealing with the last assassin, Yelu Yi looked back at Yi Li and praised. Just now, the assassin was too close to Princess Ding and the position of Princess Ding was a bit wrong. The jade pendant that Princess Ding threw out was able to hit the hidden weapon without hurting Yaoji. This was definitely not something that could be done by luck. Eyesight, technique, and strength were all indispensable. Yi Li didn't have time to pay attention to Yelu Yi's compliment. Just now, she didn't have anything suitable to make a hidden weapon, so she casually pulled off a jade pendant from Mo Xiaoyao's body and threw it out. Now that she had rescued him, she had time to worry about Mo Xiaoyao's jade pendant. After all, it was definitely not something ordinary that he carried with him. She walked over to where the jade pendant had fallen. Mo Xiaoyao grabbed her and asked with a raised brow, "What are you doing?" Yi Li said apologetically, "I'm going to take a look at that jade pendant. Is it all right?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled and looked at her with a smile as he asked, "If it's not all right, what should you do?" Yi Li furrowed her brow in distress. If it was just valuable, then it was fine. If it had some special use or special meaning, then it would be troublesome. Seeing Yi Li looking at him pitifully, Mo Xiaoyao's mood became even better. He pulled Yi Li into his arms and said with a bitter face, "Even though it's not anything important, but it's my favorite jade pendant. Wifey, what should I do?" Yi Li looked up at him. "I'll give you a new one." Mo Xiaoyao generously nodded. "All right, then it's settled. Wifey has to personally choose it." Seeing him so happy, Yi Li couldn't help but feel even more guilty. She secretly reflected on whether she had neglected him too much. Ever since they had gotten married, Mo Xiaoyao had personally taken care of her food and clothing, but Yi Li guiltily remembered that she seemed to have given him a piece of clothing on his birthday last year. That was because someone beside her had reminded her. Thinking of this, Yi Li felt even more that she hadn't treated Mo Xiaoyao too well. She seriously nodded and said, "All right, I'll personally choose it." "Wifey is so good," Mo Xiaoyao said with a satisfied smile. Even though Mo Xiaoyao said he didn't care, Yi Li still went over to take the pouch she carried with her and put away the broken jade. On one side, the two were tender and warm, but on the other side, there was a chill everywhere. The atmosphere was so heavy that even Yelu Yi, who was watching the show, couldn't help but stand a little further away. Yaoji's face was deathly pale, no longer having the enchanting charm she had on the stage. The night wind of June made her shiver uncontrollably and hug her arms. The multicolored dress on her body only made her look even paler and more haggard. Mu Yang silently looked at the woman in front of him, a complicated light flashing through his eyes. He sighed and said in a low voice, "Let's go, I'll send you back." Yaoji took a step back and said coldly, "No need to trouble Shizzy, Yaoji knows the way back." "Yaoji," Mu Yang called in a low voice, a trace of displeasure in his voice, "have you caused enough trouble? Throwing the embroidered ball in this kind of place, do you want to ruin yourself?" Yaoji raised her head and squeezed out a bitter smile on her pale face. "Shizzy means that it's okay for me to throw the embroidered ball in Ching Cheng Lane? There are only ordinary people here, and the people coming and going in Ching Cheng Lane are all rich and powerful merchants. In any case, it's not a disgrace to the title of the capital's #1 dancer, right?" Mu Yang's eyes flashed with a trace of annoyance, and he said in a low voice, "You know that's not what I meant." Yaoji was highly respected in the capital, not only because she had the support of Marquis Muyang's Shizzy and the Feng family's third young master, but also because of her outstanding dancing skills. More importantly, she never received guests in private and had a clean reputation. If Yaoji really, then from tomorrow onwards, those rich and powerful people in the capital who coveted Yaoji would trample over Ching Cheng Lane. At that time, no one would be able to help her. After all, Marquis Muyang's household and the Feng family couldn't become enemies with all the rich and powerful people in the capital for a prostitute. Chapter 262. Yaoji glanced at Yi Li, who was standing on the side. Her eyes were filled with sadness and envy. She slowly stepped forward and bowed slightly to Mu Yang. "Thank you for taking care of me these past few years. Yaoji is very grateful. But, Shizzy, please go back, we don't have to meet again." Yaoji. Yaoji didn't look at him, she nodded to Yi Li and walked to the end of the street step by step. Yi Li frowned and secretly signaled the shadow guard to follow and escort Yaoji back to Ching Cheng Lane. Although it was already curfew, it was still dangerous for a woman to walk alone in the capital in the middle of the night. Mu Yang frowned and wanted to chase after her, but Yi Li stopped him. "Shizzy, please wait." Mu Yang turned around and looked at Yi Li with a puzzled expression. Yi Li asked in a deep voice, "What does the prince want to do by chasing after her?" Mu Yang frowned. "Naturally, it's to send her back." Yi Li said, "So what if we send her back? I have met Miss Yaoji twice, how about I let someone do it for her? Or, Shizzy doesn't trust me." Mu Yang looked at Yi Li hesitantly, "But if Shizzy can't give Miss Yaoji the future she wants, it's better to break it off. Although a broken wrist is painful, I think Miss Yaoji will be able to endure it with her pride. If Shizzy blindly wavers, it may hurt the hearts of the two girls in the future." Yi Li said softly as she looked at Mu Yang. When she mentioned the two girls, she deliberately emphasized it. She reminded him that he not only needed to be responsible for Yaoji, but also the Miss Sun who was engaged to him. Mu Yang's body shook, he stared at Yi Li angrily and said, "You don't know anything." Yi Li was silent. She really didn't know anything. She didn't know the relationship between Yaoji and Mu Yang, nor did she know the relationship between him and the Miss Sun. But with Yaoji's identity, if Shizzy Manor was willing to accept or Yaoji was willing, she could enter Marquis Muyang Manor as a concubine. But looking at the current situation, whether Yaoji herself was unwilling, Marquis Muyang disagreed, or the Sun family disagreed, it was obviously not feasible. Since that was the case, Mu Yang's hesitation was obviously not a good thing. After a moment of silence, Yi Li looked up at Mo Xiaoyao and said, "Let's go back." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. He glanced at Mu Yang and said faintly, "With the relationship between Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family, Marquis Muyang will never accept Yaoji." Then, without waiting for Mu Yang's reaction, she nodded to Yi Li and pulled Yi Li towards the Prince Ding mansion. It seemed that Mo Xiaoyao's words made Mu Yang's expression even more unsightly. He stood there for a long time before finally turning around and walking in the opposite direction. Yi Lu Yi, who was left alone, looked at the pair of figures in the distance and raised his eyebrows with interest. Interesting woman. It seems that Mo Xiaoyao really has deep feelings for Princess Ding. Yi Lu Yi saw the jade pendant clearly. It was given by Emperor Taizu to the founding Prince Ding Mo Lanyun when the Da Chu state was established. It could be said that it was a symbol of the Prince Ding's identity. But later on, the prestige of King Ding's mansion flourished day by day. There was no need for a jade pendant to represent their identity, so it gradually became an ordinary decorative jade pendant. But for the Prince Ding mansion, the significance of this jade was still incomparable to ordinary precious stones. Mo Xiaoyao are Mo Xiaoyao. Is it really good to expose such an obvious weakness in front of others? Or, do you not put eye in your eyes at all? The night sky was gracefully hung with a string of eyebrows, making the quiet street appear dim and cold. The two walked side by side. Mo Xiaoyao chuckled softly. Is Li Li still worried? Yi Li was startled and looked at him doubtfully. Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Isn't Li Li worried about Yaoji? Yi Li sighed helplessly. Yaoji is such an outstanding woman. It's a pity that she was born in a brothel. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so bumpy. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and looked at her. Does Li want to help her? If Li Li speaks up for her, perhaps Marquis Muyang's mansion will accept her. Yi Li shook her head. Let's not talk about whether Yaoji is willing or not. As Princess Ding, forcing Marquis Muyang's mansion to accept someone they don't want to accept, even if Yaoji enters Marquis Muyang's mansion, she won't have a good life. What's more, isn't that Miss Sun Muyang's legitimate fiancé? She didn't do anything. Why should she be forced to accept a love rival? If Muyang really loves Yaoji more than anything else, he will naturally take care of everything. If not, how can there be so many things in the world that benefit from both sides? I still say the same thing, give up when you should, and break when you should. Mo Xiaoyao sighed softly. Li Li is really heartless. If Li Li intercedes, both Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family will give face to Li. Yi Li glanced at him faintly. If someone comes to me and asks me to accept a woman as Prince's concubine for her sake, I will just slap her away. Prince is so concerned about this issue. But does he also have this kind of concern? It doesn't matter. I'm very easy to talk to. As long as Prince personally tells me, it's fine. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao with a faint smile, Yi Li smiled very amiably. Mo Xiaoyao helplessly rubbed his nose. I will never have this kind of concern in my life. Li Li, don't worry. Yi Li snorted, not commenting on his promise. Just as they returned to the mansion, Mo Xiaoyao was invited to a meeting. Obviously, the people in the Prince Ding mansion had already received the news of Ye Lu Yi's appearance in the capital. Yi Li had just turned to go back to her room when Qin Feng appeared in front of her with a strange expression. Yi Li raised her eyebrows in confusion. She looked at him and smiled. What's wrong? Was the training too easy recently? Why haven't you gone back to rest yet? Qin Feng hesitated before saying, Wang Fei, that Miss Yaoji. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and suddenly realized, you sent Yaoji back? Commander Qin really has free time. It seems like I should mention to Ansan that your training can be a bit more advanced. What happened to Yaoji? Qin Feng's face was bitter. He looked at Yi Li and said, she fainted on the side of the road before she reached Qing Cheng Lane. So? Yi Li looked at him with a smile, a clear teasing in her eyes. Qin Feng could only force himself to say, there's no so, this subordinate sent her back. I just came to report to Wang Fei. Yi Li sighed softly. She looked at Qin Feng and said, you feel that she is very pitiful, don't you? Qin Feng was silent. Yi Li said in a heavy voice, I also feel that she is pitiful. But there are many things that we can't do just because we feel sympathy. Because there may be other people who will become pitiful because of our so-called kindness. Qin Feng understood. He nodded and said, this subordinate knows his wrongs. Wang Fei, please forgive. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and smiled faintly. The moon is bright and clear, an outstanding person is bright and clear. Comfortable and quiet, a burden of heart and mind. Qin Feng was stunned for a moment before he quickly turned around and ran outside. This subordinate will take his leave. Seeing Qin Feng run away like he was running for his life, Yi Li couldn't help but smile. When she thought of Yaoji's stiff and straight back as she left, she could only sigh softly. She had promised Mo Xiaoyao that she would personally choose a jade pendant for him. Then she remembered that Mo Xiaoyao's birthday was coming up. The next day, Yi Li took a few servant girls and went out. She looked at the shops that she frequented but didn't find any jade pendants or stones that were of any interest. Yi Li wasn't in a hurry. True top-quality jade was something that could be found but not sought. Good jade had either been carved but didn't meet her requirements, or the quality wasn't satisfactory. If she directly searched the Fu's storehouse, it wouldn't be sincere. Walking on the street, Yi Li had a headache as she thought. Chapter 263. Princess Ding. It's such a coincidence that we meet again. Just as she walked out of a jade shop, a hearty voice came from behind her. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and turned her head to look at the man standing not far away with his arms crossed. She nodded. Prince Yelu. Prince hasn't entered the palace to see the emperor yet. Yelu Yi smiled indifferently. In any case, the wedding procession will arrive in the capital in a few days. Little Prince will take these few days as a private distraction and won't trouble your country's emperor. Yi Li nodded and smiled faintly. Since that's the case, I won't disturb Prince Yelu's distraction. Coincidence? In such a big capital, they had just met last night and met here this morning, wasn't it a coincidence? Yelu Yi didn't seem to notice Yi Li's alienation and smiled. Speaking of which, this is Little Prince's first time in the Chu capital and it's really unfamiliar. I don't know if Princess can show Little Prince around as a host. Yi Li smiled faintly, her beautiful face full of apology. I'm really sorry, I don't usually go out and I'm not as familiar with the Chu capital as Prince. I'm afraid I can't lead the way for Prince. Speaking of which, Prince said yesterday that he would be a guest in the Wang Fu. My family's Prince specially waited at home this morning for Prince's arrival. Now it seems that he won't be able to wait. The corner of Yelu Yi's mouth twitched and he smiled. Forgive me, Princess. It's just that Little Prince feels that he hasn't met your country's emperor and shouldn't visit the Ding Wang Fu in private to avoid bringing trouble to Prince Ding and Princess. Don't you think so, Princess? Yi Li smiled faintly. Prince is thoughtful. Ben Fei still has some matters to attend to and will leave first. Seeing Yi Li turn and leave without hesitation, Yelu Yi narrowed his eyes and his lips hooked up in a smile. A few days ago, this one got a piece of top-quality jadeite. I don't know if Princess is interested. Hearing his words, Yi Li didn't turn around and didn't even pause her steps. Yelu Yi raised an eyebrow and continued, doesn't Princess Consort want to know what the jade pendant you smashed yesterday was? Yi Li slowly turned her head. Just as Yelu Yi revealed a smug smile, she said indifferently, since Prince didn't say anything, it means that he doesn't care. No matter what the jade pendant is, it's already broken. If this consort wanted to know, she would naturally ask the prince herself. Why would she need to hear it from an outsider? Prince, don't you agree? The smile on Yelu Yi's face gradually disappeared as he stared thoughtfully at the departing figure of the woman in front of him. No wonder she's able to obtain Mo Shuyao's favor. Interesting indeed. Princess Ding, we will meet again. It wasn't until Yelu Yi's line of sight disappeared behind her that Yi Li stopped and frowned. In the past half a year, she had done some basic research on the situation of the various countries. This Yelu Yi may look like a straightforward person on the outside, but as the only one who could compete with the Crown Prince Yelu Hong among the dozens of sons of the king of the northern tribes, he was naturally vicious and merciless. If it wasn't necessary, Yi Li didn't want to provoke this kind of person. Wang Fei, that person. Qing Shuang saw that Yi Li's expression wasn't very good and asked worriedly. Yi Li shook her head and said, it's fine. Qing Luan and Qing Shuang secretly exchanged a look and saw the worry in each other's eyes. Wang Fei might not have seen it because she was walking in front, but they had all seen the look in that prince's eyes. Qing Luan thought for a moment and said, that prince isn't a good person. Wang Fei should avoid him. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Silly girl, there are some people that you can't avoid just because you want to. Unless we don't do anything. Don't worry, I know what to do." "Newbie is worrying too much." Qing Luan smiled. She had never seen anything where Wang Fei didn't know what to do. Wang Fei probably already knew how to deal with it. She just needed to protect Wang Fei. "Don't think too much. Let's go to Fenghua Lu." Yi Li smiled faintly. As soon as she stepped into Fenghua Lu, the crisp sound of porcelain falling made Yi Li stop in her tracks. The shopkeeper of Fenghua Lu was already very familiar with Princess Ding. He hurriedly came forward and said with a smile, "This one greets Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please come in." Yi Li nodded and stepped into the store. She looked inside and asked, "Is everything all right?" The shopkeeper squeezed out a smile and said with some difficulty, "Two guests had a little conflict and disturbed Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please have a seat in this wing. A few days ago, the prince sent someone to say that he wanted some good pearls. I had wanted to send them to the Prince Ding mansion in the next few days. I hadn't thought that Wang Fei would come today." As he spoke, he led the way and invited Yi Li to sit in a private room on the other side. Yi Li nodded her head nonchalantly. Those who would appear in Fenghua brothel were either rich or noble. The conflict between these people was naturally not something that could be made known to everyone, unlike the trivial matters of ordinary families. Entering the private room and sitting down, the shopkeeper personally carried a few boxes of pearls to Yi Li. Yi Li opened them and looked. As expected, they were all high-quality pearls. Among them was a box of light purple pearls. There were only 19 pearls in the box. What was rare was that each pearl was the size of a pigeon's egg. There was no difference in size, color, or shape. When the box was opened, the light purple light caused the entire room to be covered in a layer of mysterious light. Yi Li said with some shock, "These are night pearls?" One night pearl wasn't rare. What was rare was 19 night pearls that were the same color and color. The shopkeeper said with a proud smile, "Wang Fei is right. These are night pearls. One night pearl is worth a city, not to mention a box. And it's the rarest purple color. Is Wang Fei satisfied?" Yi Li nodded with a smile. "Shopkeeper has worked hard." Seeing that Yi Li was satisfied, the shopkeeper's smile became even brighter. It had to be known that he had spent a lot of money and effort to get these pearls. But this kind of treasure wasn't something that anyone could use. If they were sold separately, the value of the treasure would be greatly reduced. The Ding mansion didn't lack money or power. If Princess Ding liked this box of night pearls, then he wouldn't have to worry about this business for at least half a year. Thinking of this, the shopkeeper took out a few blueprints for Yi Li to see. "Wang Fei, please take a look. This is the blueprint that our Fenghua building's best craftsman had specially drawn for this box of night pearls. Is Wang Fei satisfied?" Yi Li looked at the blueprint. It was indeed an exquisite piece of jewelry. If it was made, it would be the envy of all the womenfolk in the capital. But Yi Li didn't plan on making it into a piece of jewelry. Naturally, everyone liked beautiful and dazzling things. But if this kind of pearl was made into a piece of jewelry, then the person wearing it in the dark would be a live target. Although this kind of thing wasn't very practical, it was still good to use it as a collection or as a gift. Thinking about it, Yi Li said to the shopkeeper, "I also want this box of night pearls. Later, I will have someone send the blueprint over. Shopkeeper, you can have someone make it according to the blueprint. Also, make a few pieces of jewelry." Although he was disappointed that Yi Li didn't use his blueprint, seeing that Yi Li chose some pearl jewelry, the shopkeeper was very happy. These top-grade jewels were all priceless. It was hard to find and hard to sell. Ding Country's prince was very generous to Wang Fei. Chapter 264. After choosing the jewelry, Yi Li was about to ask the shopkeeper if Fenghua Lu had any good jade when the sound of porcelain shattering came from the side. Yi Li frowned. Before she could speak, there was a woman's cry of pain. Clearly, someone had made a move. "Shopkeeper, who is that?" The shopkeeper's expression was not good. He said in a low voice, "Wang Fei, it is the shizzy of Marquis Muyang Fu and the young miss of the Sun family of the Ministry of Rights. And Miss Yarrow Ji of Ching Cheng Lane. This one will ask them to leave." Yi Li thought and raised her hand to stop him. She stood and said, "I know them all. I'll go take a look." The shopkeeper didn't dare to say more. He quickly led Yi Li to the private room on the side. When the door was opened, the people inside all turned to look at the door. Yi Li stood behind the shopkeeper and looked inside. There were many pieces of porcelain on the ground. A delicate young girl in yellow was crying in Mu Yang's arms. Sitting next to her was a middle-aged noblewoman with light makeup but a face full of anger. Yarrow Ji was dressed in red. Her face was pale as she stood at the side. Teacups were scattered around her feet. What is going on? Yi Li stepped into the room and closed the door. Seeing Yi Li come in, Mu Yang's expression changed slightly. He helped the young girl in his arms up and nodded to Yi Li, "Wang Fei." Suddenly disturbed, the middle-aged noblewoman glared angrily at the door. But when she saw Yi Li's face, she quickly restrained her anger. She stood and smiled apologetically. "Kye-sun greets Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded and said faintly, "Sorry to disturb Furen." She didn't have any impression of this Sun Furen. She was the daughter-in-law of the Minister of Rights, Sun Daren. Her husband was just a fifth-grade assistant minister. Normally, she wouldn't talk to Yi Li at banquets. Sun Furen knew that when Princess Ding said sorry to disturb, she was afraid that her movements were too loud and had disturbed Princess Ding. She hurriedly invited Yi Li to take a seat and said with a smile, "Wang Fei is joking. I'm afraid we have disturbed Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please forgive us." Yi Li looked at Mrs. Sun and Miss Sun next to Mu Yang. She was not very satisfied with their appearances, but the elegant and gentle temperament of a scholarly family made them feel very comfortable. They did not have the arrogance of some noble families. Miss Sun noticed that Yi Li was looking at her. She blushed and quickly lowered her head to stand behind Mu Yang. Yi Li smiled faintly. She looked at Mu Yang and said with a smile, "Young Master Mu, what a coincidence. Are you accompanying Miss Sun to choose jewelry?" She had never seen Miss Sun before. Today, she saw that the man was talented and the woman was beautiful. They were a perfect match. "Don't forget to send an invitation to me and Prince on the day of the wedding. We can also share the joy." Miss Sun blushed. Yaoji was stunned for a moment, then she sneered and said, "Forget it, it's nothing. People like us are originally inferior to others, aren't we? It just so happens that Princess Ding is also here today. Then let's make it clear. I, Yaoji, swear that I will never marry into Marquis Muyang's household as a concubine. Moreover, after last night, Yaoji's reputation should have spread in the capital, right? Even if the Sun family relents now, I'm afraid Marquis Muyang will never agree, right? Mu, Yaoji does not dare to say that we are even now. Just take it that Yaoji owes Mu in this life and will repay him in the next life. As for this life, you and I have nothing to do with each other. Mrs. Sun, are you satisfied?" Hearing Yaoji's words, Yi Li's heart skipped a beat. She frowned but did not speak in the end. Mu Yang looked awkwardly at the stunning woman in front of him whose pale face made her red dress dim. A trace of pain and helplessness flashed through his eyes. As the only male in this generation of Marquis Muyang's household, he shouldered the rise and fall of the entire Marquis Muyang's household. But he could not stop himself from being attracted by this beautiful and strong woman. It was just that he had underestimated Yaoji's pride and Marquis Muyang's household and the Sun family's reaction to this matter, which led to the current dilemma. Today's matter was even more unexpected. Originally, he was only accompanying his fiancée and future mother-in-law to buy things under the order of his mother, in the name of cultivating their relationship. But he did not expect to meet Yaoji, who had just finished shopping and was about to go out, when he came to Fenghua Building. And when Mrs. Sun proposed to come in for a chat, although he felt a little uneasy, he still had a glimmer of hope, so he did not stop her. But Yaoji looked enchanting and affectionate, but she was stubborn. After a few words, she finally angered Mrs. Sun and attracted Princess Ding, who also happened to come to Fenghua Building. Chapter 265. Yaoji. Looking at Yaoji's resolute face, Mu Yang couldn't help but step forward, wanting to hold her hand. However, his sleeve was caught by someone else. Young Master Mu. Miss Sun's delicate face was full of surprise and panic. Mu Yang's heart suddenly turned cold, and he calmed down instantly. Miss Sun was already engaged to him. Once something went wrong with this marriage, with the Sun family's strict family rules, even if Miss Sun didn't take things too hard and die, he was afraid that she would have to spend the rest of her life as a Buddha. Thinking of this, Mu Yang's feet couldn't move forward anymore. Yi Li sat on the side and couldn't help shaking her head. The Sun family and the Mu family wouldn't accept Yaoji at all. It wasn't because Yaoji came from a brothel, but because she was too outstanding and Mu Yang had feelings for her. As for Mu Yang, he wasn't a bad person. He wasn't even a playboy, but he couldn't solve the current situation. If he was a playboy, he could marry Miss Sun and continue to indulge in debauchery outside. Even without Yaoji, with his identity, he might be able to find a woman as beautiful as Yaoji. If he was ruthless enough to break off the marriage with Miss Sun, he would be the only heir of the Mu family. Even if Marquis Muyang was unwilling, he would still step back in the end. Yaoji's charming eyes were half closed, hiding the trace of a bitter smile in her eyes. She turned to Yi Li and said, "Princess, thank you for saving my life last night." Yaoji will take her leave. Her cold eyes swept over the faces of the other 3 people in the room, and she said lightly, "Yaoji is just a prostitute. It's not worth your trouble. Young Master Mu and everyone else, please don't disturb us in the future. Goodbye. Miss Yaoji." Miss Sun, who was standing beside her, suddenly raised her head and called Yaoji. When Yaoji turned back, she looked at Madame Sun and said softly, "Miss Yaoji, young master, if young Master Mu really loves Miss Yaoji, after we get married, please take Miss Yaoji into the mansion. I just hope young Master Mu can give Lian and the Sun family some face." "Lian Madame Sun scolded in a low voice. Mu Yang looked at the petite and graceful girl in front of him in surprise. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. He didn't expect that she would be the first to let him go. Yaoji snorted, turned around and left. Such an arrogant attitude made Mrs. Sun, who was already unhappy, furious. "How dare you? What kind of attitude is this?" Yaoji turned back and said with a contemptuous smile, "I said I would never enter Marquis Muyang's mansion. Do Madame Sun and Miss Sun think I'm playing hard to get? I, Yaoji, am indeed a prostitute, but I'm not that lowly. Yaoji of Marquis Muyang's residence is too high for me to reach, and I don't want to. Yaoji can't accept Miss Sun's love, so I won't thank you." "Yaoji, you." Mu Yang frowned. He knew that it was unfair for her to become a concubine, but this was the best way he could think of to satisfy both sides. Yaoji looked at him coldly. She was totally different from her usual gentle and charming self. Mu Yang sighed softly and said, "Yaoji, can't you suffer for my sake?" The room was silent for a long time. Suddenly, Yaoji smiled faintly. Mu Lang, do you know my name?" Mu Yang was stunned and looked at her with some confusion. Yaoji shook her head and waved her sleeves. She said resolutely, "Unless you marry me openly, we don't have to see each other in this life." "Marry you?" Mrs. Sun stared at Yaoji and sneered. "Who are you to ask the Mu family to marry you openly? Even if Shizi Mu isn't engaged today, you don't have this qualification. It's Lian Er's magnanimity to accept you. It's your blessing. Don't embarrass yourself." Yaoji said proudly, "So what? Since you can't do it, Shizi Mu, please go back. Or, do you want to stay here with them and watch me be humiliated?" "Yaoji, you." Mu Yang frowned, his face showing anger and displeasure. Yaoji had always been gentle and understanding. When had she ever been so unreasonable? Yaoji didn't seem to care about his displeasure at all. She glanced at Miss Sun, who was standing on the side, and said disdainfully, "Mrs. Sun is right. I follow you because I want to marry into the Marquis Muyang's mansion. Since you can't marry me, what are you doing here? You want me to bow my head and be a concubine to this little girl who has no appearance or talent and is not as good as me except for a good family background. I, Yaoji, am not so cheap. There are many men who want me. There must be one who is willing to marry me as his wife. Enough. Mu Yang's face was livid. He pulled Miss Sun, who was tearing up because of Yaoji, and said to Mrs. Sun, "Mother-in-law, let's go back." Mrs. Sun glanced at Yaoji and nodded. She smiled at Yi Li and said, "Princess, I've made a fool of myself. I'll leave first." Yi Li nodded. "I won't see you off. Take care, Mrs. Sunday." The three of them pushed the door and went out. From the beginning to the end, Mu Yang didn't look at Yaoji again. Naturally, he didn't notice that a trace of blood slowly overflowed from Yaoji's pale lips. Until the footsteps outside disappeared, Yaoji's body swayed. Seeing that she was about to fall, Qing Shuang and Qing Luan, who came in from the outside, quickly stepped forward to help her to sit down on a chair. Yaoji paused and then looked up at Yi Li with a smile. "Princess, haven't you seen enough?" Yi Li shook her head and said softly, "Why do you do that? Is it worth it to ruin yourself like this for Mu Yang?" Yaoji was stunned and smiled bitterly. "I don't know where the love comes from. It goes deep. If I can choose by myself, why should I?" Yi Li waved her hand and said with a smile, "I understand. If you have seen the sea, you can't see the water. If you don't see the clouds, you can't see the clouds." Elegant people moan for no reason. If you are so hungry that you can't eat 3 meals and have no clothes to wear, you will know that love is false. Ordinary people run around all day for food and clothing. If they don't have love, they won't live their lives. Yaoji looked at her strangely and said, "Princess is also the head of 100 flowers after Shu. How can you think like this?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Tacky?" Yaoji didn't speak, but her expression clearly showed a trace of her own. Yi Li smiled indifferently and said, "When I was still in the boudoir and young, I thought I would become Princess Li. Later, Prince Li broke off the engagement. I think it's nothing. At worst, I can find someone with a lower family background. As long as he has a good character, he can live a normal life. Later, I was appointed to marry Prince Ding. It's difficult to refuse the imperial order. Can I bet the whole Yi family and Shu family to disobey the imperial order?" Yaoji naturally knew the situation when Yi Li joined the Prince Ding mansion. At that time, she also sighed for the third Miss Yi. But she didn't expect that in less than a year, the third Miss Yi became the Princess Ding that was envied by all the noble ladies in the capital. And she was the one who was really pitied. What did Princess think at that time? What can I think? Try to make yourself live a better life in the future. Don't tell me you want to commit suicide in a moment of depression. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at her. Yaoji frowned and looked at Yi Li. She said with some disbelief, "Has Princess never expected a relationship? How could she not know that she and Mu Yang would not have an ending at all?" But in the dust of life, she saw the fickleness of human nature. She couldn't help but want to grasp any trace of warmth and sincerity. She knew that Mu Yang really loved her, but his sincerity couldn't let him give up his responsibility. So, what she could repay him was to let him marry at ease and no longer be involved. Chapter 266. Yi Li sighed and said, "Well, I shouldn't laugh at you. But I think, a relationship depends on the efforts of both parties. No matter how much a person gives, this relationship won't last long. I know Mu Yang loves me. I love him, too," Yaoji said in a low voice. Yi Li looked at her with her chin in her hand. "Love is a matter of 2 people. You are 3 people. You love him and he loves you. What about Miss Sun? She's the most innocent one." Yaoji bit her lip and stared at her. "Do you think Miss Sun is really so weak and innocent?" Yi Li waved her hand and said, "It has nothing to do with whether she is weak or not. She is Mu Yang's fiancée. In this world, not every woman who has her engagement broken off is as indifferent as I am. I heard that the Sun family has strict rules. If Mu Yang breaks off the engagement, Miss Sun has no other choice but to worship Buddha. So even if she is acting, it is just to maintain her legal status. Besides, she didn't commit murder, arson, or crime. We can dislike her, but we can't say she is wrong. If it weren't for you and Mu Yang, she could be a real weak and elegant lady, get married smoothly, and be an ordinary wife and the mistress of Marquis Mu Yang's mansion. Do you think she will be happy to be told by her fiancé that he has someone else in his heart before marriage? Miss Sun didn't torture you to death because of hatred, which proves that she is not a bad person. Hearing her words, Yaoji said blankly, "So, is it really my fault?" Yi Li touched her nose uncomfortably. She really couldn't say that it was Yaoji's fault. Yaoji and Mu Yang had known each other for at least 7 or 8 years, but Mu Yang was engaged for less than 2 months. It was naturally not Yaoji's fault in terms of first come, first served, but now she had to bear this mistake. Well, it's probably God's will. Don't take it too seriously. Miss Yaoji is talented, beautiful, and rich. You don't have to worry about life. Who hasn't met a few scumbags when they were young? Hearing Yi Li describe him as a scumbag, Yaoji glared at her unhappily. Yi Li smiled and said, "I know he's not a bad person. I was just saying." Yaoji couldn't help but grin and say, "Although Princess Consort's words are not pleasant to hear, I know you are trying to comfort me." Yaoji thanked him. "But why would a princess come to comfort a person like me? I don't often comfort people. If what I say isn't to your liking, please don't mind it." Yi Li smiled apologetically. "As for the identity, since you are Feng San's friend, I can barely be counted as Feng San's friend. Even for Feng San's sake, I can't just ignore it." Yaoji stood up and smiled. "Thank you, princess. Goodbye." Yi Li frowned, looked at her and said, "You don't look well. Do you want to take a rest before you leave?" Yaoji shakes her head and says smilingly, "Don't worry, I'm really tired these days. I'm going to leave the capital for a rest." Halfway through her words, Yaoji's body softens and falls to the ground. Qing Luan, who is standing next to her, quickly supports her and pulls her back. Yi Li is also shocked. She asks Qing Shuang to call Qing Yu outside to come in and check. After a while, Qing Yu hurries in to check Yaoji's pulse and looks at Yi Li with a strange look. Yi Li says anxiously, "What's the matter? Just say it." Qing Yu looks at the woman in red who is in a coma in the chair, looks up at Yi Li and says, "Her pulse is slippery. She is pregnant for 3 months. Maybe the fetus is affected, so." The fetus is affected. The 4 words make Yi Li dizzy. She only feels that thunder is rolling over her head. So, is she trying to separate the father and mother of the child just now? Meddling in other people's business really brings retribution. Although Qing Yu is not a doctor, she still takes a look at Yaoji seriously according to the principle of a doctor's parent's heart. She frowns tightly and says with some dissatisfaction, "This is too careless." She is already pregnant for more than 3 months, but she still makes so much trouble. It's really God's blessing that she can keep the child. Yi Li raises her eyebrows and says, "Maybe she doesn't know it herself." Qing Yu rolls her eyes disapprovingly. How stupid she is if she doesn't know it when she is pregnant for more than 3 months. It will be obvious in a few days. She can't hide it. Yi Li nods knowingly. "I understand. She's pregnant." She looks at the unconscious person in front of her with some embarrassment. "What should I do now?" Meddling in other people's business, Yi Li asks people to send Yaoji back to settle down with her head full of thunder. As soon as she returns to the mansion, Nanny Sun comes to report that someone sent something specially for Princess. Yi Li opens the box to take a look. It is a piece of jadeite that has only been treated slightly and has not been carved. But just by looking at the flawless green color, she knows that this is a piece of jadeite of the highest quality. Thinking with furrowed brows, Yi Li has an idea of the person who sent the gift. Raising her head, she asks Nanny Sun, "Did the person leave a name and address?" Nanny Sun says with a smile, "Princess doesn't need to worry. The prince has already sent someone to send a gift in return. The prince said that if Princess likes it, you can accept it. If you don't like it, you can just deal with it." Yi Li nods and says, "Put it away first. We'll talk about it later." "Where is the prince?" "The prince is in the study. Master Feng has returned." Yi Li nods and turns to go to the study. Previously, Feng Jiao and them had split up in Yongju and led the Black Cloud Cavalry north. He had arrived in Jing half a month later than them. Yi Li just walked to the door of the study when Mo Xiuyao's voice came from inside. "Is it Miss Li? Come in." Yi Li pushes open the door and goes in. Feng Jiao stands and says, "Greetings to Princess." Yi Li nods with a faint smile and says, "Master Feng doesn't need to be so courteous." Feng Jiao looks at Yi Li and then at Mo Xiuyao. He felt that there was something different about these two. "Princess, just call me Feng-san." Yi Li smiles in response. Walking to Mo Xiuyao's side, she sits down and says, "I'm not disturbing you, am I?" Mo Xiuyao shakes his head and says, "It's nothing major." "Does Miss Li have a problem?" Yi Li recounts her encounter with Yelu Yi. Looking at Feng Jiao standing to the side, she only briefly mentioned her encounter with Yaoji and Mu Yang. She didn't mention Yaoji's pregnancy. It was better for the person involved to decide if they should tell others. Mo Xiuyao furrowed his brow at Yelu Yi's obvious attempt to get close to Yi Li. He sneered and said, "It seems that Yelu Hong isn't giving him enough pressure so he is able to leisurely walk the streets of Chujing. Feng-san, go back and spread the news that Yelu Yi has arrived in Jing and is going to participate in the selection of candidates for the peace marriage." Feng Jiao raised an eyebrow and smiled, nodding silently in response. Once this news was spread, the nobility of Chujing would feel that Yelu Yi was going to drop a level. No one would pay attention to him secretly arriving in Chujing, but participating in the selection of candidates for the peace marriage was going too far. Yes, Da Chu State didn't send a real princess for the peace marriage, but the daughters of Da Chu State weren't for the northern tribes to pick and choose. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.